They told you to start your day with hustle, with urgency, with alarms blaring and screens glowing. They told you to get ahead, to chase productivity, to pour coffee over your exhaustion and call it motivation. But if that worked, why do so many people wake up tired even after a full night's sleep? Why do mornings feel heavy, like the day already owns you before you've even opened your eyes? The truth is, clarity doesn't come from rushing. It comes from stillness. Peace doesn't come from the outside. It's built quietly from the inside. And Buddhism holds the key. For thousands of years, monks, sages, and seekers used the hours of darkness not just for rest, but for transformation. While the world slept, they rewired the mind. They trained the heart. They emptied the clutter. And when morning came, they woke up light, clear, unshaken, fully alive. Tonight, as you listen to these lessons, you'll feel something shift. The noise will fade. The weight will loosen. The anxiety that used to greet you before the sun even rose, gone. And in its place, a calm so deep it carries into your morning like sunlight through an open window. This isn't just a sleep audio. This is a new beginning for your thoughts, for your mornings, for the way you carry yourself through the world. Are you ready? Let's begin. Before the body even moves, before the eyes adjust to the dim light leaking through the curtains, something else is already awake. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't knock gently. It just starts, spinning, whispering, replaying. This is the part of the mind that doesn't sleep. And it's the first thing that greets most people in the morning. Not peace, not presence, but noise. And it's this exact moment, the first breath of awareness, that holds the power to either shape your day with clarity or trap it in confusion. You don't have to open your eyes to start feeling overwhelmed. For many, the battle begins while still lying in bed, a quiet tug of dread, a pulse of anxiety. That familiar inner voice that says something's wrong, something's missing, something needs to be fixed right now. But nothing has even happened yet. This is the trap, the invisible one. And the worst part is, it feels normal. So normal, most people never stop to question it. They just get up, rush into the day, and carry that mental fog with them like a heavy coat. Every conversation, every decision, every emotion gets filtered through that first unconscious download. But it doesn't have to be that way. Buddhism teaches that the mind is not what we think it is. It's not a fixed identity. It's a stream, constantly flowing, constantly reshaping itself based on conditions. And one of the most powerful moments in that stream is the transition from sleep to wakefulness. That thin slice of time where the body hasn't moved, but the mind is already active. That's the doorway. And most people stumble through it blindly, already reacting before they've even remembered who they are. This first mental chatter isn't neutral. It's loaded. It carries judgments, assumptions, comparisons, fears. It brings yesterday's worries, tomorrow's deadlines, and every insecurity in between. And because it happens before full awareness, it slips under the radar. It sets the tone without asking. But in Buddhist psychology, there's a word for this automatic process: sankhara, mental formations, residues of old thoughts, beliefs, habits. These formations don't disappear overnight. They travel with us, even into sleep. They plant seeds in the subconscious. And the moment we start waking up, those seeds sprout. So, when someone wakes up and immediately feels behind, even though the day hasn't started, that's not intuition. That's old mental conditioning resurfacing. When the first breath feels shallow and tight, it's not because the air is wrong, it's because the body is responding to thoughts it doesn't even fully understand yet. And that's why breath awareness isn't just a relaxation tool, it's a sword. It cuts through the noise before it takes over. Training the breath during sleep may sound strange, but it's deeply rooted in Buddhist practice. Before sleeping, monks are taught to center their awareness on the breath, not just for calmness, but for continuity, so that even when consciousness fades into dreams, the body-mind connection remains intact. The breath becomes a bridge. And when practiced consistently, this creates what's known as bhavana, mental cultivation. The breath becomes the thread that ties night to morning, unconscious to conscious, reactivity to mindfulness. If the first thoughts in the morning are shaped by what was planted the night before, then pre-sleep practice becomes the foundation for morning clarity. Most people fall asleep with distractions, a screen, a spiral of thoughts, a mental to-do list disguised as relaxation, and that mental environment doesn't dissolve. It seeps into the architecture of the mind, coloring the way we wake. That's why the trap is so effective. It doesn't announce itself. It just becomes the background noise of waking up, and the mind believes it's truth. But Buddhist breath awareness flips that pattern. It doesn't try to fight the thoughts. It gently interrupts them. It says, yes, there is noise, but there is also breath. Come back here. And in doing that, the mind learns that presence is possible even before the body moves, even before thought fully takes form. There's a moment, just before full waking, where clarity is possible. It's subtle, like the stillness right before a bell rings. Most people miss it because they're already bracing for the day. But if you train awareness to rest in the breath before sleep, the mind remembers. And in that fragile space between sleep and wakefulness, the breath can lead. Instead of reacting, you witness. Instead of judging, you observe. And this one shift, this one decision to anchor in breath rather than thought, can change the entire trajectory of the day. It's not about having a perfect morning routine. It's about protecting the mind's entry point, because once those first few thoughts pass unexamined, they build momentum. The mind grabs onto the first fear, the first pressure, the first reminder of something unfinished, and from there, everything snowballs. But if awareness is already resting in the breath, the thoughts don't stick. They pass through, like birds flying across an open sky, and you get to choose how you meet the day rather than being dragged into it. Even a few seconds of breath awareness upon waking changes everything. It interrupts the loop, it breaks the pattern. And what most people don't realize is that this moment, this first touch of consciousness, is one of the most powerful parts of the entire day, because it's raw. It hasn't been shaped by emails, by news, by other people's expectations. It's clean, and if used well, it becomes the source of strength, not stress. Buddhist teachings talk about vigilance at the gates of the mind. That doesn't just mean during arguments or hard decisions. It means from the very first flicker of awareness. It means treating your first thought like a guest, asking, do I want to let this in? Does this serve my clarity? Most people don't ask. They just open the door and let every passing thought throw a party inside their head, and then wonder why the day feels chaotic. But a trained mind knows better. It waits. It listens. It checks the breath before it checks the phone. It lets the body speak before the story begins. And slowly, clarity becomes not something to chase, but something that rises naturally, like the sun, quiet and certain. There's a false idea that mornings need to be productive to be valuable. But in Buddhist thought, it's not about productivity, it's about presence. A single minute of deep presence does more for the soul than an hour of rushed doing, and presence begins with awareness of breath, before movement, before labels, before effort. It's also worth noting that many people who wake up anxious aren't broken. They're just untrained. Their mind isn't hostile, it's habitual. It's doing what it's been taught: prepare, protect, predict. But when the mind is constantly predicting danger, it forgets how to be here. Breath awareness retrains it. It says, "You're safe right now. There's no fire, no threat, just breath." And slowly, the nervous system calms. The thoughts soften. And waking up doesn't feel like entering a war zone anymore. There's also the physical side. When the body is tight in the morning, clenched jaw, shallow breath, tight chest, that's not random. It's the residue of unconscious mental activity. But when the breath is trained to stay smooth during sleep, the body wakes up different. The chest expands naturally. The jaw relaxes. There's no immediate rush of adrenaline, just a quiet stability that holds space for whatever comes next. In this way, clarity isn't something added to the morning. It's what's left when the noise is removed. And the first thought trap, the idea that the first feelings are true, the first thoughts are you, that trap starts to crumble. Because breath becomes the reference point, not fear, not memory, not mental leftovers from a restless night. It's not about perfection. Some mornings will still be foggy, some thoughts will still slip in, but the difference is, now there's a choice. Now there's space between the thought and the self, and that space, that's where peace lives. So what do you do with this? Start before you sleep. Breathe, not just to relax, but to lay the foundation. To tell the mind, this is where we begin tomorrow. Let the breath be the last thing you feel as sleep comes, and when morning breaks, let it be the first thing you return to, not as a chore, as a gift. Then watch what happens. Watch how the weight lifts. Watch how the fog clears. Watch how you start to trust your mornings again. This is how Buddhism rewires the start of the day. Not with effort, not with pressure, but with awareness. Breath by breath. From darkness into light. From thought trap to thought freedom. And it all begins before your eyes even open. That space between sleep and waking isn't just a moment, it's a mirror. And what shows up in that mirror each morning, peace or panic, ease or tension, isn't a mystery. It's the result of what came before. Most people think the morning starts with the alarm, but the real beginning happens much earlier, in the quiet hours of the night when no one is watching and the mind is wide open. If the first thought in the morning can shape the entire day, then what prepares that thought begins in the dark. And that's where the work begins, not in reaction, but in ritual. not in the light of day, but in the silence of night. It's not what time someone goes to bed, it's how they enter sleep. That entrance is the difference between carrying stress through the next 8 hours or using those hours as deep psychological training. Buddhism doesn't treat sleep as dead time, it treats it as sacred ground. And how that ground is walked, mentally, emotionally, energetically, decides whether the next morning rises as a storm or as still water. Most people go to bed trying to escape the day, but Buddhist practice uses the night to deepen it, not through effort, through subtle attention. Before the body relaxes, the mind is already preparing for where it will rest. And the truth is, it doesn't always rest. Sometimes it loops, sometimes it wrestles, sometimes it carries conversations, fears, or to-do lists all the way into the dream world. That's because the subconscious isn't passive, it's listening, always, and the last few minutes before sleep are some of the most powerful programming windows in the entire human experience, not metaphorically, biologically. Neuroscientists now confirm what monks have known for centuries. The brain is most suggestible right before sleep. Whatever we think about, feel, dwell on, it gets amplified and stored, not just as memory, as emotional direction. So when someone ends the day with frustration, their nervous system learns to carry that. When sleep begins with anger or sadness or numb distraction, those feelings don't disappear, they embed. They become the emotional climate the subconscious steeps in for hours. And when the body wakes, that emotional energy carries over. It's why someone can sleep 8 hours and still feel heavy. The body rested, the mind didn't. Buddhism offers a different path, a deeper one. It doesn't try to control the sleep state, it prepares it, it meets it with intention. This is where nighttime mindfulness becomes more than a habit. It becomes a kind of wisdom, a way of placing the right seeds before the mind opens fully to absorb them, and the practice starts simply with awareness of breath. The same breath that clears the thought trap in the morning becomes the key that unlocks peaceful insight during the night. But this isn't just breath to fall asleep faster, it's breath to shape the inner world, to slow the thoughts without rejecting them, to soften the body without needing to escape anything. When breath becomes the final awareness before sleep, the mind begins to quiet naturally, not by force, but by redirection. The breath becomes the message. It says, "There is nothing to fix right now, there is only presence." And with repetition, the subconscious learns that safety doesn't come from solving, it comes from stillness. Many Buddhist traditions teach that the mind, when calm and clear before sleep, continues to cultivate that calmness even while dreaming. In certain schools of Tibetan Buddhism, this becomes a form of dream yoga, not lucid dreaming for entertainment, but awareness training through sleep itself. Even without formal dream practice, the principle remains. What you place in the heart of the night becomes the mood of the morning. Think of it this way. The mind doesn't shut off when the body sleeps. It reorganizes, it files, it restores, and it creates. But it creates based on what it's been fed. So, if someone ends the day watching chaos, scrolling through fear, or mentally arguing with people who aren't even there, their sleep becomes tinted by that input. It's like painting the walls of your inner home in dark colors and then wondering why you don't wake up feeling light. Buddhist nighttime practice offers another approach, ending the day with clarity. Instead of running from thoughts, you meet them gently. You don't judge, you don't grasp, you breathe, you watch, and most importantly, you release. The mind, when allowed to let go without pressure, naturally returns to equanimity, not because it's forced, but because that's its original state. Another part of Buddhist practice before sleep involves reflection. This isn't overthinking. It's subtle, ethical inventory, not guilt, not shame, just awareness. What was said today? What was thought? What was done that created peace? What was done that created suffering? The point isn't punishment, it's insight. It's about seeing clearly, because what goes unexamined gets repeated, and reflection before sleep lets the mind digest the day rather than carry it unfinished into the night. This reflection also plants something deeper: intention. In Buddhism, intention is everything. It's the energy behind every action, the motivation behind every thought, and it doesn't disappear during sleep. Setting intention before rest is like programming the GPS of the subconscious. The direction becomes peace, the route becomes compassion, the result becomes morning clarity that isn't fragile, it's grounded. One of the simplest but most profound practices is metta bhavana, the cultivation of loving kindness. Before sleep, directing goodwill toward yourself and others shifts the entire emotional tone of the night. It's not about reciting words mechanically, it's about feeling warmth, generating gentleness, extending care, first to yourself, then to someone you love, then to someone neutral, then even to someone difficult. This softens the emotional terrain. It replaces resentment with space, and when the subconscious bathes in kindness, the body sleeps differently, the heart rests more fully, and the morning that follows carries that residue of peace. It's worth mentioning that sleep in Buddhism is not seen as lost time. It's seen as part of the practice. How you sleep reveals how you relate to control. How you fall asleep shows your relationship with letting go. And how you wake up shows whether that letting go was real or just physical. If someone's body lies still, but their mind is still fighting, that's not rest. That's unconscious tension. And the deeper the tension, the more reactive the next day becomes. But by entering sleep with mindfulness, tension is noticed, not avoided. It's held, observed, and released through breath. This takes practice. It doesn't happen in one night, but it doesn't have to, because the change is cumulative. Each night becomes a layer, a message, a training ground, and slowly the mind learns how to drop its guard, how to rest in awareness instead of worry. There's also a practical benefit. When sleep is preceded by mindfulness, the brain's stress chemistry changes. Cortisol levels drop, heart rate slows, digestion improves, dreams become less chaotic. The entire nervous system recalibrates toward calm, and that calm lingers, not just in the morning, but in every choice made after. Because clarity isn't just for waking, it becomes the lens through which life is lived. For many people, sleep is the only time they get to disconnect. But Buddhist practice flips that idea. It says, don't disconnect, reconnect. Not to thoughts, not to fear, but to the breath, to stillness, to the soft, steady awareness that's been there the whole time, waiting under all the noise. This isn't about having perfect thoughts before sleep. It's not about being enlightened overnight. It's about direction, intention, gently guiding the inner current back toward peace again and again, until that peace becomes the default, until it shows up in the morning not as a surprise, but as a steady companion. And perhaps most importantly, this practice creates a sense of trust in the mind, in the process, in the self, because when the night is treated as sacred, the morning becomes sacred too, not because everything is easy, but because the inner world is no longer at war with itself. So tonight, when the lights are off and the world fades, don't slip into unconsciousness out of habit. Take a breath. Notice what's rising. Let it soften. Let it go. Place the intention gently. May I rest in clarity. May I release what I no longer need. May peace be what follows me into the morning. And then watch what happens, not instantly, but over time. The body sleeps, the mind resets, and the next time the sun returns, you won't just be waking up. You'll be arriving, fully present, unshaken, clear. Letting go doesn't end with sleep. It continues the moment consciousness returns. After a night trained in peace, after hours spent preparing the inner world for clarity, what happens next can either continue that freedom or collapse it instantly. That next moment, the very first spark of identity that floods in when the eyes open, that's where many people lose their center. Not because the day is difficult, but because the self they believe they must become to face the day is already a burden before the feet touch the floor. But what if that identity never arrives? What if the morning doesn't require a role? What if the clarity we long for isn't something to add, but something to drop? This is where Zen enters with a teaching so radical, so freeing, it often sounds like a riddle. Begin the day with no mind, not blank mind, not empty of thought, but free from the constant grip of identity. Zen calls it mushin, the state of no mind, a space where action flows naturally, where thoughts rise and fall without getting stuck, and where the false self isn't needed to do what's needed. It's the art of being without clinging, and in the morning, it becomes a doorway to clarity like nothing else. Most people wake up and immediately try to remember who they are, not their name or address, but the version of themselves they've been rehearsing, the worker, the parent, the one with regrets, the one with goals, the one with something to prove. And this identity, though familiar, is heavy. It's built from memory. It carries old expectations. It drags yesterday into today before the day even begins. And that's where anxiety enters, not because life is chaotic, but because the self feels obligated to perform again, to uphold a story, to be consistent with a version of self that may no longer serve. Zen invites a different response. It says, don't pick up the self right away. Let the mind be like still water. Let the body wake up without rushing to become someone. Just be. Just sit. Just breathe. And notice what arises without claiming it. When you do this, something strange happens. The usual tension doesn't show up. The inner chatter slows down, and instead of waking into pressure, you wake into openness. The brilliance of no mind is that it doesn't ask you to erase who you are. It just asks you to stop clinging to it so tightly, it makes space. It removes the friction. So instead of needing to remember everything that defines you, you just begin fresh. Not with amnesia, but with presence. This shift doesn't remove responsibility. It removes the weight of trying to live up to a fixed idea. And when that idea loosens, so does the struggle. The average morning starts with a checklist of identity. What needs to be done? Who needs to be pleased? What role must be played? But Zen shows that when those roles are not immediately reattached to, the mind behaves differently. Thoughts move, but they don't crash. Emotions stir, but they don't take over. There's a space between awareness and reaction. That space is no mind. And in that space, clarity isn't something you find, it's something that reveals itself. There's a common misunderstanding that having no identity means being lost, but it's the opposite. The person who can drop identity in the morning is the person who knows they are more than it. They know the self is a tool, not a prison, that thoughts are useful but not the full picture, that emotions pass but don't define. This awareness is what allows true spontaneity, not random behavior, but action rooted in what's real, not what's rehearsed. When waking starts from no mind, there's a lightness. The body stretches without expectation, the breath flows without tension, and the thoughts that come, because they will come, don't have to be held. They can just pass. This is not laziness, it's a powerful discipline. It takes more strength to not become the story than to act it out. It takes more awareness to sit in silence than to repeat a mental script. Zen often uses the metaphor of clouds and sky. The sky is the true mind, open, boundless, clear. The clouds are the thoughts, the identities, the stories. They appear, they move, they disappear. But the sky remains unchanged. Practicing no mind in the morning means resting as the sky, not chasing every cloud. It means watching what rises without attaching to it. And when you do, the mind doesn't just become calm, it becomes sharp, alert, responsive. One of the greatest benefits of this approach is how it changes decision-making. When identity is held tightly, decisions are made from fear, fear of failure, fear of not being consistent, fear of not being good enough. But when no mind is practiced, decisions are made from direct perception. What needs to be done becomes obvious, not forced. There's no internal committee of old voices debating worth. There's just seeing and acting. This clarity doesn't require hours of meditation each morning. It starts with just one moment of stillness, waking up, and instead of reaching for the phone or the schedule, reaching for the breath. Sitting upright, feeling the ground, noticing the impulse to become someone, and choosing not to, even for a few seconds. That small refusal breaks the pattern. It shows the mind that presence is possible, and from there, the rest of the day can flow differently. Zen also teaches through paradox. One of its most famous ideas is that when you let go of self, everything becomes effortless. This sounds strange at first, but anyone who has ever been deeply absorbed in something, painting, dancing, cooking, knows the feeling. There's no thought of me doing it. It just happens. That's no mind, flow without friction, and it can begin at the start of the day. In this state, even challenges feel lighter. Not because the situation changed, but because there's no extra story about what it means. There's no need to prove anything, just response, just action. This is where spontaneity becomes wisdom, where silence becomes clarity, and where the absence of identity becomes the source of strength. The reason this is hard for most people is because identity feels safe. It gives structure, but it also gives limitation. The moment someone says, "I'm this kind of person," the mind starts filtering reality to match that belief. And anything outside that story feels threatening. No mind allows for a different experience, one where you can be fully engaged without being defined, where each morning is not a repetition but a discovery. This approach also softens relationships. When waking into no mind, there's no automatic resentment, no automatic defense. Interactions are met fresh. The person in front of you is not reduced to a label. They are seen as they are. And because there's no strong ego in place, reactions don't escalate. Conflict reduces. Communication deepens. Compassion becomes natural, not forced. Even creativity changes. When the mind isn't busy defending an identity, it becomes open to new ideas, new solutions, new perspectives. Mornings that begin this way feel more alive. Not because there are more things to do, but because each moment feels less polluted by mental residue. This is where insight lives, not in effort, but in openness. There's also a deep freedom in not having to perform your identity every morning. No pressure to be the perfect version of yourself. No need to be productive the moment you wake. Just breath, just presence, just life as it is, without needing to narrate it. This creates a kind of internal silence that's rare in modern life, and in that silence, the world becomes clearer. Sounds feel sharper. Colors look richer. The day unfolds with a kind of rhythm that doesn't come from a calendar, it comes from within. Over time, this becomes natural. The mind starts to prefer openness to control. The body relaxes into being. The old habits of rushing to be someone fade. And what's left is a life that feels less like survival and more like expression, not in grand gestures, but in simple awareness. Waking into no mind isn't about denying your history. It's about choosing not to carry it all at once. It's about letting today be today, not yesterday's echo and not tomorrow's projection. It's about trusting that you don't need to become something to be whole. That breath is enough. That silence is full. That presence is powerful. So when tomorrow comes, try it. Don't rush. Don't label. Don't explain. Just wake. Just breathe. And let the self arrive only if it needs to. Until then, rest in the clarity of no mind, because that space, the one without identity, isn't empty. It's where your clearest self already lives. Clarity doesn't last by accident. Even after a morning of stillness, no mind, and breath-based awareness, there's something else lingering just beneath the surface. Something invisible, yet shaping everything. The way the mind moves, the feelings that rise without warning, the reactions that don't match the moment. It's not always about the present. Sometimes what weighs down the morning has nothing to do with the morning at all. It's yesterday, still echoing in the background, still leaving traces, still planting seeds. And if left unseen, those seeds grow into patterns without ever asking for permission. This is what Buddhist teachings call karma, not punishment, not cosmic justice, but momentum. Mental, emotional, energetic momentum. The residue of intentions and actions that haven't yet settled. Most people think karma is something that comes later, something external, but its first signs show up internally, in the quiet tension in the chest, in the heaviness in thought, in the subtle way the face tightens when recalling a conversation. Karma travels, and one of the most overlooked places it shows up is in the morning, hidden inside the silence. The problem isn't that something happened yesterday. The problem is that it wasn't fully processed. The words said in frustration, the decision made out of fear, the small lie told to avoid discomfort. These moments leave subtle imprints. They don't shout, they linger. And when sleep arrives without awareness, those imprints aren't erased. They're carried forward, embedded in the nervous system. So when morning comes, it's not just a new day. It's a continuation of mental energy that hasn't been resolved. This is why some mornings feel heavier without explanation. Not because the body is tired, but because the heart is still carrying stories that weren't closed. And because these karmic impressions aren't loud, they're easy to miss. But they affect everything. The tone of thought, the emotional baseline, the openness to experience. Even the way someone holds their breath or avoids silence is shaped by what hasn't been let go. The act of letting go isn't just a spiritual idea, it's a neurological process. The brain is constantly rewiring based on what it feels is important. And when something from yesterday was emotionally charged but unexamined, the brain holds on to it, expecting it might need to be dealt with again. This creates a subtle state of alertness, even if the conscious mind has moved on. The heart hasn't. And that tension, that vigilance, becomes the background music of the next morning. Buddhism invites us to pause and look deeper, not with judgment, with curiosity. What is the mind still holding on to from yesterday? What emotion rose and wasn't honored? What truth was avoided? What resistance was felt but ignored? This reflection isn't about guilt, it's about freedom. Because karmic weight only grows when it's hidden. When it's seen, it begins to dissolve. Silent karma is also created by the things we think didn't matter. The sigh held in, the scroll through news that left unease, the small internal argument we replayed with someone who isn't even around. These micro moments add up, and the mind records them. Not because it's punishing us, because it's trying to complete the cycle. Unfinished mental loops beg to be closed, and if we don't close them with attention, they loop again the next day. This is why Buddhist practice emphasizes the end-of-day reflection, not as a ritual, but as a form of mental hygiene. Just like brushing teeth, the mind needs clearing, the heart needs review. Not every night will be dramatic, but even small acts of awareness begin to shift the weight. Asking simple questions. Did I speak from kindness? Was there anything I clung to? Did I act from fear or from understanding? These aren't moral tests, they're openings. Each question loosens the grip of yesterday. And when that grip loosens, the morning feels lighter, not by miracle, but by choice. The deeper understanding is that karma is not fixed. It's fluid. It doesn't lock us in, it follows the direction we give it. So if each night ends with gentle awareness, the trajectory of the next day shifts. Instead of waking into unconscious habits, we wake into space. A space where the emotional leftovers of the past don't immediately set the tone. And in that space, new choices become possible. Another hidden layer of silent karma comes from self-concept. If someone spent yesterday repeating old narratives, "I'm not good enough," "I'm always behind," "I can't change," those thoughts don't disappear with sleep. They reinforce the identity, and that identity wakes up with them. The story doesn't reset unless it's challenged, and to challenge it, we need to see it. Seeing it doesn't mean fighting it. It means gently acknowledging the pattern and then choosing something softer in its place. That's where compassion comes in, not just for others, but for ourselves. When silent karma is acknowledged with compassion, it loses its edge. It stops pushing. It starts dissolving. Buddhist teachings remind us that karma isn't just action, it's intention. And the intention to heal, to understand, to grow, that alone begins rewriting the pattern. One powerful practice for this is pre-sleep metta, or loving kindness directed toward oneself and the day just lived. Even 5 minutes of holding the heart gently and saying, "Whatever I did today, may I learn from it. Whatever pain I caused, may I understand it. Whatever I avoided, may I face it with care tomorrow." This soft invocation signals to the subconscious, it's okay to let go. It's okay to move forward. That small act of emotional honesty clears the path for a different kind of morning. It's also important to understand that silent karma doesn't always feel emotional. Sometimes it shows up in physical resistance. The body feels tight. The breath feels trapped. The shoulders are hunched before the mind even registers tension. These physical sensations are often the result of unresolved energy. And Buddhism teaches that awareness doesn't live in the mind alone, it lives in the body. So, to release silent karma, we also have to listen somatically. Scanning the body gently before sleep can reveal where energy is stuck. Noticing where breath doesn't flow easily, where tightness sits, not trying to fix it, just feeling it. That alone is often enough. Because the body, like the mind, doesn't need control. It needs presence, and presence is what allows the impressions of the day to pass through instead of getting lodged in muscle and breath. Karma also builds in relationships. The words left unsaid, the truths swallowed to avoid discomfort, the judgment held silently. These carry weight. Not because we're bad people, but because connection matters. And when connection is strained, even subtly, the heart knows. It registers the break, and unless acknowledged, it carries that fracture into the next day, coloring how we speak, how we think, even how we sit with ourselves. Buddhist compassion teaches that these breaks don't need to become scars. They can be invitations, opportunities to soften, to repair, even if just internally. Before sleep, holding someone we struggled with in our awareness, not to fix them, but to release our grip on the pain. This begins a healing process that changes how we wake up. We may not forget, but we don't carry it like armor anymore. And the next morning, we move a little freer. Over time, this becomes a way of living, not in fear of karma, but in partnership with it, knowing that what we leave unprocessed today will echo tomorrow, not as punishment, but as a reminder to slow down, to feel, to finish each emotional story before closing the day. And when that becomes the habit, mornings don't just feel better, they feel earned, not because we controlled the mind, but because we cared for it. This kind of awareness doesn't make life easier, but it makes it clearer. It teaches that clarity isn't a mood, it's the result of deep inner housekeeping. And when silent karma is no longer ignored, but welcomed into the light of attention, something beautiful happens. The mind stops repeating itself, the heart stops bracing for impact, and each morning starts to feel like a return, not a restart. So tonight, and each night after, before the body goes still, take a few moments, ask gently, what am I still holding? What wants to be released? Who needs my forgiveness? What thought do I no longer need to believe? Then breathe. Just breathe. And let the day close with care. That care will follow you, and the next time the light returns, you'll wake not with a mind full of noise, but with a heart that already feels lighter. That is the quiet power of karma, not in what it gives or takes, but in how it reflects the way we carry ourselves through time. And when we meet it with presence, the future begins to change without force, just by being seen, just by being held, just by being gently let go. Even after the heart has released the weight of yesterday, even after the breath has softened the edges of the waking mind, clarity remains delicate. It doesn't shout. It doesn't push. It arrives the way light arrives, quietly, slowly, across the surface of the world. And if awareness is still, it will notice that light teaches in ways no voice ever could. It shows how to begin without forcing, how to rise without resistance, how to change without fear. Because light, more than just a physical phenomenon, is one of Buddhism's oldest metaphors for wisdom. Not because it's bright, but because it reveals. And what it reveals is how to live gently in a world that never stops changing. When dawn breaks, it doesn't argue its way into the sky. It just enters, subtle and unannounced. The most ancient Buddhist texts speak of this process not only as a moment of the day, but as a sacred opportunity, a teaching hidden in plain sight. To the untrained eye, it's just a shift in color, but to a mind rooted in mindfulness, it's a moving lesson in impermanence, patience, and presence. Impermanence is often spoken about like a loss, but dawn reframes it. The darkness doesn't disappear violently. It fades. The light doesn't dominate. It grows. There's no war between night and morning, only a passing of time that honors both. In that transition, there's a profound reminder. Nothing stays, but nothing is lost. Everything moves forward, not through control, but through rhythm. And that rhythm, when seen clearly, becomes a teacher of how to let life change without clinging to one part of it. Watching dawn is one of the simplest mindfulness practices, yet one of the most powerful. It trains the eye to slow down, to see not just the world, but the process. And Buddhism places great importance on process. Things don't just happen, they unfold. And when the mind is trained to witness unfolding without grasping, peace begins to settle in a deeper layer of awareness. Because it's no longer about what's happening, it's about how we meet what's happening. This is where interdependence begins to show itself. The light does not exist on its own. It arrives through conditions, the rotation of the earth, the pull of gravity, the presence of an atmosphere. Without all these conditions, there is no dawn. And in the same way, our mornings are not born from one source. They come through the conditions we create, the thoughts we plant, the karmic weight we carry or release. Every moment of clarity is supported by countless small, often invisible, causes. Buddhism reminds us that nothing exists independently, and dawn shows us this directly. The light is not separate from the earth. The color of the sky is not separate from the dust in the air. Even our ability to see it depends on where we are, how we breathe, whether we're paying attention. When this is understood, the illusion of isolation begins to dissolve. The morning is no longer out there. It's a shared movement between the inner world and the outer one. And that shared movement is what the Buddha called paticca samuppada, dependent origination. Everything arises based on conditions, and when the conditions change, the experience changes. So when someone says their morning feels heavy, it's not personal, it's conditional, and if the conditions shift, so will the weight. Dawn teaches this not with words, but with certainty. 1 hour before, there was darkness. Now there is light. Not because the sun demanded it, but because the conditions aligned. And this is true in the mind as well. Peace arises when the mind is quiet, the heart is open, and attention is rooted in what is, not what should be. There's also something deeply grounding about connecting with light first thing in the morning. Most people wake and immediately stare into artificial brightness, screens, lamps, digital clocks. But natural light carries something different. A rhythm that matches the body's biology, a frequency that speaks to the nervous system without needing translation. Science confirms what Buddhism sensed long ago. Morning light resets the circadian rhythm, balances mood, and restores hormonal cycles. But beyond the body, it also balances perception. When we step outside and watch light move across a surface, grass, stone, water, our sense of self begins to soften. There's no urgency in sunlight, no judgment. It falls equally on everything. And in that impartial glow, we're reminded that clarity doesn't come from trying to be perfect. It comes from returning to stillness, from noticing how light rests on what is, not what we wish it was. This stillness is the doorway to mindfulness, not a forced focus, but an open attention. The kind that allows thought to come and go without pulling us away. The kind that lets emotion rise and fall like waves without fear of drowning. Light doesn't grasp anything, and neither does true awareness. It sees, it accepts, it holds, and it moves forward without attachment. That's why many Buddhist monasteries begin their day in the early hours, facing the direction of the rising sun. Not to worship it, but to align with it. To let its rhythm reset the body, the breath, the thinking, not just symbolically, visibly. Because in those moments of quiet watching, the mind returns to its natural state, not scattered, not tense, but clear. A clarity that doesn't come from fixing life, but from seeing it rightly. It's also important to understand that observing light doesn't require a perfect sunrise. Even a dim grey shift from night to morning carries the same lesson. That lesson is in the change itself. The willingness to see what is emerging, even if it's subtle, even if it's cloudy, even if it's incomplete. That's how inner clarity works too. It's not always dramatic, it's not always beautiful, but it's always moving, always possible, always inviting you back into presence. One of the deepest teachings in Buddhist practice is non-resistance, and dawn models that perfectly. It doesn't fight for space, it simply arrives, and the world adjusts. In the same way, when the mind stops resisting what is, when it stops trying to shape every moment into a preference, it begins to rest. And from that rest, new insight comes, not as thought, as knowing. This knowing doesn't speak loudly, it doesn't debate. It feels like the warmth on skin after a cold night, subtle, steady, unmistakable. And just like the sun, it shows up even on days when it's hidden behind clouds, because the truth doesn't disappear when we can't see it. It just waits for us to look again. The metaphor of light in Buddhism is used again and again, not because it's poetic, but because it's exact. The awakened mind is often described as luminous, not from knowledge, but from presence. A mind that sees clearly glows from within, not with ego, but with peace. And this luminosity isn't something we invent. It's something we uncover, something we remember each time we watch the world wake without rushing it. When dawn is observed mindfully, we begin to see that there's no need to force clarity. We don't have to fix our thoughts or purify our emotions before the day starts. We simply have to witness what is rising, both in the sky and in ourselves. And in that witnessing, something loosens. The pressure fades, the breath returns. The day begins not with a push, but with an invitation. This practice, simple, silent, and profound, reshapes everything. The way we get out of bed, the way we speak to others, the way we respond to setbacks. Not because we've become better people overnight, but because we've remembered the nature of things, that all arises, all passes, and that in between there is a peace untouched by change, a light that doesn't depend on outcome. So tomorrow, or the next time the morning comes and you are still enough to notice, watch how light touches the world. Watch how it changes the shape of things without needing to fix them. Watch how it reveals beauty without trying to impress. Let that be your guide, not a motivational push, a soft return to breathe, to awareness, to the place where nothing needs to be added, only seen, only held, only allowed to rise. And in doing that, you'll find the kind of clarity that doesn't disappear by noon. The kind that lingers quietly beneath everything you do. Because once you've seen the dharma of dawn, it never leaves you. It just keeps teaching. Every time the world begins again, light enters gently without needing to grasp anything. It changes the world not by force, but by presence. And when the mind begins to mirror that same quality, when it can let the morning unfold without pulling, without resisting, without tightening its grip around thought, something rare begins to form, clarity without craving. But that moment doesn't last by itself, because right beneath the quiet beauty of dawn, something else begins to stir, a pulse, a need, a reaching. It happens fast, so fast it feels like part of waking itself. The body breathes, the eyes blink, and before any real thought has formed, a desire slips in unnoticed. Not for anything specific, just a soft sense that something is missing, that something needs to be added, that this moment, as it is, isn't quite enough. That's the first entrance of craving, and it doesn't need language to appear. It arrives as an impulse, an emotional lean towards something. Sometimes it looks like hunger, sometimes like restlessness. Sometimes it hides as planning or comparison or scrolling, but the root is the same, a quiet rejection of the present moment, a subtle message in the body that says, "This isn't complete yet. I need something more before I can relax." In Buddhist psychology, this process has a name: tanha, often translated as thirst. It's the root of suffering, not because wanting is evil, but because this wanting never stops. It renews itself automatically with each return to consciousness. The moment the self is remembered, desire tags along, and this is not a flaw in the person. It's a feature of the mind when untrained. Waking becomes fused with wishing, not deliberately, habitually. What makes this craving so deceptive is that it feels normal, natural. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It slides in, dressed as motivation, as curiosity, even as love. But what it truly is absence, a pulling towards something believed to be missing. And, if left unnoticed, it guides the first thoughts of the day, sets the emotional temperature, and begins the cycle of reaching before anything has even been received. This craving can latch onto anything: a task, a person, a cup of coffee, a plan. It doesn't care what it grabs as long as it's moving, because craving doesn't need satisfaction. It needs momentum. That's why, even after one desire is fulfilled, another arises right behind it. It's not the object, it's the process, the movement away from stillness toward stimulation. And this is why waking with craving feels exhausting, even when nothing has gone wrong. Because the body hasn't moved yet, but the mind is already running, already chasing, already measuring the gap between what is and what should be. And in that space, peace dissolves. Buddhist teachings don't ask us to hate desire. They ask us to see it clearly, to meet it not as an enemy, but as a process, a habit that can be loosened through awareness. And the loosening starts not in the morning, but at night before sleep. What many people don't realize is that desire can be softened during sleep. Not by controlling dreams, but by reshaping intention before unconsciousness sets in. The last thoughts before sleep often set the emotional tone of the next day. If the mind is steeped in longing, regret, comparison, it will carry those seeds into sleep, and they will bloom silently, waiting to unfold at the first crack of consciousness. But if sleep is entered with clarity, if breath, compassion, and detachment are the final impressions, the grip of craving loosens. Not entirely, but noticeably. The mind wakes up less hungry, less frantic, more spacious. There's still movement, but it's not compulsive. It flows from presence, not pressure. Training this is subtle. It's not about force. It's about remembering that the craving impulse, while automatic, is not mandatory. It can be seen, it can be paused, it can be met with stillness. When waking up and the first sense of wanting appears, pause. Don't answer it, just watch. Let it be there. Feel how it moves in the body. Does it rise in the chest, the belly, the throat? Where does it go when ignored? Where does it go when named? That simple practice of observing instead of obeying breaks the cycle. It doesn't eliminate desire, it transforms the relationship. The mind no longer sees it as a command. It sees it as weather, passing through, not permanent. This shift is more than just philosophical. It has real impact on how the day unfolds. When desire leads, the mind is scattered. It flips between tasks, conversations, emotions, always looking for something more. But when awareness leads, the mind is collected. Each moment becomes enough. Each action is complete as it is, not because it achieves something, but because it was met fully. This is what detachment means, not withdrawal, but non-dependence. The ability to move towards something without needing it to complete us. The ability to enjoy without gripping, to let go without losing. Detachment during sleep works by dissolving the conditions that normally amplify craving. When the mind is softened by compassion, the heart becomes less desperate. When the breath is long and slow, the nervous system doesn't brace. And when sleep is entered with gratitude rather than frustration, the subconscious feels safe. And safety is what reduces craving. Because craving often masks fear, the fear of lack, of disconnection, of being unseen. But when the night ends in presence, the morning begins in sufficiency, and that sufficiency becomes the ground for everything else. One way to practice this is by shifting the inner question. Most people wake up asking, "What do I need to do?" or "What do I need to fix?" But a mind trained in Buddhist awareness asks, "What is already whole right now?" That question doesn't stop productivity. It refines it. It removes the pressure to chase worth through action. And in that removal, energy is freed. Joy reappears. The day begins not with demand, but with discovery. Another layer to this is noticing how desire often disguises itself as identity. I want this because I'm this kind of person. But the truth is, identity often grows around repeated cravings. It's not always who we are. It's what we've chased long enough to believe is necessary. And that belief builds walls around presence. But when desire is seen for what it is, a wave, not a truth, those walls begin to soften. And behind them, something more real begins to shine through. Something that doesn't need to want in order to be. This practice is also gentle. It doesn't punish desire. It doesn't shame the impulse to reach. It holds it. It honors it. And then it asks, do I need this to be okay? And when the answer is no, even once, that's a breakthrough. Because that no comes from wisdom, the part of us that already knows. Peace doesn't require addition. It only asks for presence. One of the core teachings of the Buddha is that craving leads to suffering. But the reverse is also true. Awareness leads to freedom. And that awareness can begin before full thought, before full wakefulness, even in the earliest stirring of the mind. When we meet that first desire with stillness, we shift the whole trajectory of the day. Waking without wishing doesn't mean nothing gets done. It means what gets done is rooted in enoughness, not in desperation. It means meals are eaten with presence, not rush. Conversations are felt, not managed. Silence is welcomed, not filled. And action flows not from craving relief, but from offering clarity. Each morning is a chance to practice this, not once, but with each breath. Each new thought is an opportunity to either react or return, and each return builds strength. A kind of strength that looks like softness. A kind of clarity that doesn't blink when faced with noise. A kind of peace that no longer depends on getting something first. And that peace is what stays. Long after the caffeine wears off, long after the to-do list is done, long after the sun goes down again, it stays because it wasn't built on wanting. It was built on seeing. And what's seen clearly no longer controls us. It simply passes. So tomorrow, when the eyes open, notice what rises first. The breath, the body, the impulse to want. And then wait. Don't reach for anything. Just watch. Let the world enter you gently, not through hunger, but through quiet. That quiet is your teacher. That pause is your freedom. And that is how a single morning becomes a doorway to everything you've been trying to find. Desire softens when awareness returns. The restless pull weakens when presence meets it early, before thought takes control. But there's another layer still at work, hidden beneath the cravings and impulses, the residue of the day, scattered across the mind like fine dust. It doesn't push, it doesn't pull, it just lingers. And when left unnoticed, this subtle layer shapes everything: mood, clarity, decision-making, even how well the heart opens to the next moment. This is not noise in the way we usually understand it. It's quieter than that. It's the leftover energy of unprocessed thoughts, unresolved feelings, unsaid words. It's what seeps into the mental atmosphere when the day ends and the lights go out. And while the body sleeps, the mind continues to hold on to these fragments like shadows that haven't settled. This is mental dust. It collects whether we realize it or not. It builds from small things, a conversation we replay without closure, a regret that flashes briefly and disappears, a moment of shame that wasn't acknowledged. It's the way thoughts don't always finish their cycle and instead drift through the mind, half formed, half felt. And just like physical dust in a room, we don't always see it until the light hits it. But it's there, sitting, accumulating, weighing down the space of thought without making a sound. Buddhism doesn't ignore this. It meets it directly with ancient tools that weren't made for superstition. They were made for clarity. Visualization and mantra are two of those tools. Practices that might seem abstract or symbolic, but are actually precise methods for cleansing the subtle body and the thought field. Not through suppression, through alignment. They don't force thought to stop. They allow thought to dissolve in something more spacious. When the mind is filled with unfinished thinking, it can't fully rest. Even if sleep comes easily, the quality of that sleep suffers. The subconscious is busy sorting through piles of content it didn't ask for. And in the morning, what rises isn't stillness, it's fog. A mental haze that's hard to describe but easy to feel. Slower responses, duller perception, that slight pressure behind the eyes, even after a full night's sleep. These are all signs that the mind is holding on to dust. This dust is not made of problems, it's made of repetition, loops that didn't get cleared, emotional knots that didn't fully untie. A mind trained in Buddhist awareness starts to feel this weight not as drama, but as build-up. And like any build-up, it requires cleansing, not once, but regularly. Visualization works by redirecting the internal focus. The mind is always creating images, usually without realizing it. Every thought has an impression. Every memory leaves a shape. Visualization makes that process conscious. It gives the mind something deliberate to hold, so that scattered energies can begin to gather and dissolve. One common Buddhist visualization is the lotus, a symbol of purity rising from muddy waters. When visualized during sleep preparation, the lotus becomes a container for everything heavy, the regrets, the unfinished sentences, the restlessness. Each exhale becomes a release into the petals, and the image itself becomes a message to the mind. This is where you let go. It's not the picture that matters, it's the intention behind it. The subconscious doesn't speak in language, it speaks in emotion, color, shape, sensation. Visualization bridges the conscious mind and the dreaming mind. It gives shape to release. So instead of thoughts floating chaotically into the sleep cycle, they are gently set down, placed somewhere, acknowledged, and freed. Mantra works similarly, but through sound. Not just any sound, but sacred syllables that carry centuries of meaning and vibration. Not magical words, structured frequencies. Mantra doesn't control thought. It outshines it. It gives the mind a stable rhythm, a place to return to. And in the hours before sleep, this repetition begins to smooth out the scattered surface of the mind. A mantra like Om Mani Padme Hum isn't meant to be translated word for word. It's meant to be felt. Its repetition becomes a gentle brushing of the inner space. Each cycle clears a little more debris. Each sound smooths over a little more tension. And when practiced consistently, mantra becomes not just a sound, but a mental environment, a field where dust cannot settle easily because the surface is already awake. These practices are not replacements for thinking. They are ways to rest the thinking mind. They are reminders that not every thought needs to be finished. Not every feeling needs to be understood right away. Some things dissolve simply by being seen, felt, and then allowed to pass. Visualization and mantra create the conditions for that passing. What matters most is consistency. Dust doesn't come from one event, it comes from accumulation. So the practice must match that rhythm. Nightly cleansing becomes a form of internal housekeeping. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady. A few minutes before sleep. A quiet image, a soft sound, a breath that feels honest. These things change the quality of sleep. They change the weight of the morning. They make space for clarity to return not as a reaction, but as a default. When this becomes part of the nightly ritual, mornings start to feel different. The mind doesn't wake up spinning. The emotional tone is lighter. Reactions are slower to arrive. Because there's space now, a mental field that isn't cluttered with leftovers. That space makes room for presence, and presence makes room for compassion. for others, but also for ourselves. Mental dust also affects memory. A cluttered mind forgets easily, not because it's broken, but because it's overloaded. When thoughts aren't cleared, they blur into each other. But a cleansed mind remembers differently. It doesn't hold on to everything, but what it holds clearly. Sharp, alive. This is especially important when the day ahead is full. A dusty mind adds pressure, a clear mind adds precision. And beyond functionality, there's peace, the kind that doesn't come from completing tasks or solving problems. The peace of feeling internally spacious, of knowing that thought is not in control, that it can come and go without leaving a mark, that the emotional residue of the past day doesn't have to shape the next one. This kind of peace builds over time. It doesn't announce itself. It grows slowly, like breath filling a room. And before long, you'll start to notice that even during the day, thought has less grip. Reactions have less bite. Judgment softens. Not because you're trying harder, because there's less clutter to pull from, less noise, less tension disguised as thinking. Some nights, visualization will feel vivid. Other nights, it will feel flat. Some evenings, the mantra will flow easily. Others, it may feel dull. That's not a failure. That's the mind adjusting. The process works even when it feels subtle, because it's not about performance. It's about care, about attending to the inner space the way we attend to our homes, with respect, with intention, with the understanding that clarity is not given, it's cultivated. So the next time you feel foggy for no reason, ask yourself, what's lingering? What hasn't been set down? What story loop is still half open? You don't need to fix it, just see it, hold it, then bring it to the breath, or to a sound, or to an image that helps you place it down. Let the petals open, let the mantra hum, let the debris settle without clinging. And when you wake, you may find that nothing dramatic has changed, yet everything feels lighter. That's the sign of a mind that's been cleared, a mind that remembers itself before thought, a mind that's ready not to react, but to begin again, fully, gently, and without dust. When the mental dust has been swept, when the fragments of thought no longer clutter the path between sleep and wakefulness, what remains is a deeper silence, a stillness that feels clean. But beneath that stillness, something else is always happening, something most never notice. Because while the surface of the mind rests, the subconscious never sleeps. It works in patterns. It follows instructions. It repeats. This quiet background activity, the hidden rituals of the subconscious, shapes not only how the mind sleeps, but how it wakes, reacts, and forms the entire emotional landscape of the day. These rituals are not conscious choices. They are silent programs born from repetition, shaped by experience, and left unexamined. But Buddhism doesn't ignore this machinery. It studies it carefully, especially through the lens of Abidharma psychology. The Abidharma is one of the oldest and most detailed Buddhist explorations of the mind. It breaks down mental experience into components, showing how feelings, thoughts, intentions, perceptions, and habits arise and pass. It teaches that every moment of consciousness carries seeds, bija, and that these seeds sprout based on the conditions created both in waking life and in sleep. The subconscious, according to this view, is not a vague emotional basement. It's a finely tuned system of karmic momentum, running sequences while we dream, while we toss and turn, even when we lie still in the deepest layers of rest. And each of those sequences has a consequence. The rituals of the subconscious aren't necessarily dramatic. They don't always involve vivid dreams or restless tossing. They often show up in the quality of the thoughts that appear first thing in the morning. A sense of guilt with no clear cause. A familiar worry that has no immediate trigger. A sadness that appears like weather. These are not random. They are the emotional residue of the inner routines we've trained the mind to run, the scripts it rehearses when the light is gone. Abidharma teaches that the mind moves even in sleep through cycles, moments of awareness, moments of intention, moments of sensation, even if those moments aren't consciously experienced. And each one is an opportunity. Either the subconscious continues cycling through old reactive loops, or it begins to rewire itself through the ethical and emotional intentions planted before sleep. This isn't about forcing thoughts. It's about shifting the trajectory of the inner flow by adding new patterns rooted in clarity, compassion, and non-grasping. Most people don't realize how structured the subconscious is, but every time we fall asleep in fear, the mind learns to carry that fear silently. When we end the day obsessing, judging, or bracing for disappointment, those emotions become part of the nightly loop. The subconscious doesn't judge. It simply repeats what's been fed. It runs what's been rehearsed. And if we're not deliberate, we fall asleep rehearsing confusion, then wake up inside it. But this can change. The subconscious can be guided, not by control, but by planting ethical seeds. In Buddhism, ethical doesn't just mean moral, it means aligned with clarity and well-being. It means thoughts, intentions, and reflections that are based in reality, not delusion. When the mind is gently led into rest with these kinds of inputs, the subconscious picks up the rhythm. It builds new rituals. One of the most direct ways to do this is through mental recollection. Abidharma identifies several powerful forms of recollection. Recollection of the Buddha, of Dharma, of Sangha, of generosity, and of morality. These are not just devotional practices. They are precise tools for mental purification. Reflecting on these principles before sleep shapes the quality of mental processes during the unconscious hours. It gives the mind material that is stable, clear, and uplifting. For example, ending the day with a quiet reflection on compassion, perhaps recalling a moment of patience or even wishing well to someone who caused harm, tells the subconscious, this is what matters. And the subconscious, in its quiet, tireless way, responds. It weaves that into its cycle. It begins to favor that pattern over the older one of resentment or fear. It doesn't happen all at once, but over time, this becomes the default inner ritual. Another layer to this process is the role of intention. In Buddhism, intention, cetana, is the seed from which karma grows. And setting intention just before sleep is one of the most powerful ways to steer the subconscious. Not goals, not demands, but simple, honest inner statements. May I wake with clarity. May my sleep be free from harm. May I rest in kindness. These thoughts are more than affirmations. They're directional. They give shape to the hidden currents of the mind, and the more they're repeated, the more they become the script that plays when we're not looking. Dreams also reflect this process, not always literally, but symbolically. A mind full of unresolved conflict will often produce dreams with tension, avoidance, confusion. A mind that has been softened by mindful attention and ethical reflection may still dream vividly, but the tone shifts. There's less resistance, more spaciousness. This is the subconscious adjusting its posture, responding to the new input, learning to settle. Visualization can support this shift as well. In some traditions, the image of a clear sky or a gently burning lamp is used to symbolize the awakened mind. Holding such an image before sleep becomes a message. This is the space I return to. And while the mind may wander during the night, the imprint of that image lingers. The subconscious carries it, and it returns subtly in the form of increased awareness, calmer moods, and less reactivity in the morning. All of this points to one truth. The subconscious is not the enemy. It's not a chaotic trap. It's a mirror. It reflects what it's given. And when it's given mindfulness, compassion, and clarity, it responds, not instantly, but steadily. And the rituals it runs during sleep begin to shift from repetition to renewal, from fear to rest, from craving to contentment. This doesn't mean the mind will never slip. Some nights will still be restless. Some mornings will still feel heavy. But the overall direction changes. The baseline lifts. The default becomes less noisy. And most importantly, there's a growing sense of partnership with the inner world. A feeling that sleep is not a place of unconsciousness, but a place of gentle training. That rest is not a gap in growth, but part of the path. Even the structure of the sleep cycle supports this. The brain moves through different stages: light sleep, deep sleep, REM. And each one is influenced by what was happening before rest, by what we were thinking, by what we felt, by how we breathed. And all of this shapes the rituals of the subconscious, not in big, flashy ways, in subtle tone, in emotional direction, in the flavor of the thoughts that arise without our help. This is why consistency matters. Even a few nights of mindful pre-sleep practice begin to tilt the scale. The subconscious starts to expect calm. It starts to build its patterns around peace. And peace becomes the hidden ritual, the script that plays beneath everything else, the light that hums quietly even through the darkest hours. So when sleep comes, don't crash into it. Walk into it with care. Bring the mind with you, not in thought, in presence. Reflect, recollect, release. Plant the seeds you want to meet in the morning. Speak to the subconscious in its own language, image, feeling, rhythm, and then let go. Because once the new ritual is planted, you don't need to manage it. The mind knows what to do. It carries what you give it. And when the sun rises again and the breath deepens, you'll know something has changed. Not dramatically, but undeniably. The inner ritual has shifted, and the day begins not from noise, but from quiet. Not from craving, but from clarity. Not from forgetting, but from remembering what you've been training for all along. When subconscious rituals are tended to with care, when intention becomes a nightly companion and ethical seeds are gently planted before rest, the mind begins to stabilize. It doesn't wander into chaos so easily. It no longer clings to old loops. But even with this inner discipline, something softer and harder to grasp still arises each morning. A tone, a flavor, a certain emotional atmosphere that isn't tied to a single thought, yet still influences every choice. This is the mind's weather, an unseen climate forming long before the alarm goes off. Not sudden, not random, but shaped slowly through sleep, through thoughts that drift like wind across a quiet field, through feelings that condense like morning dew, and how we meet that weather matters. The mental atmosphere someone wakes into is often treated like coincidence. But Buddhism teaches that nothing of the mind appears without cause. There are always conditions, always precursors, and the emotional tone of the morning is no exception. Just like the sky changes based on humidity, temperature, and pressure, the mind changes based on karmic residue, unexamined thoughts, and the energy of the previous day. When these mix, they create mood before cognition, feeling before meaning, a state before a story. This state affects everything: the speed of thought, the softness of attention, the way others are seen. A clear mind doesn't just think better, it receives life differently. And that reception is deeply influenced by the atmosphere set while the body sleeps. When the inner conditions are calm, the mental weather is light. There's more space between thought and reaction. But when the conditions are tense, carried from unresolved emotion or ignored mental noise, the morning fogs quickly. Nothing feels quite right. There's a weight that doesn't belong to anything specific, just a heaviness, and that heaviness becomes the lens. Buddhist practice doesn't try to deny this, it works with it. It prepares the internal forecast. It teaches how to shape conditions so the mind is more likely to greet the morning in balance. And it starts by seeing that mental weather is not personality. It's not permanent. It's not who you are. It's passing, like clouds. It's not to be fought. It's to be witnessed. The Buddha described the mind in many ways, but one of the most elegant was as a field. What's planted grows. What's neglected withers. What's disturbed reflects distortion. And sleep is the time when that field resets. Not because activity stops, but because the mind shifts into a more receptive mode. It stops reacting to external input and begins processing what's already inside. It sorts, filters, imagines. All of this, even unconsciously, sets the mood of the next day. The clearer the processes during sleep, the lighter the atmosphere upon waking. One of the most overlooked causes of mental weather is how emotion is stored. Not just dramatic emotion, but subtle feelings that were ignored. Small disappointments, quiet stress, background tension. These don't vanish just because the day ends. They settle into the subconscious. And during sleep, the mind tries to organize them. If there's too much of this emotional debris, the result is emotional overcast. A dull, tired tone that colors everything, even on days that are peaceful on the outside. This is why emotional honesty before sleep is vital. Not dramatic expression, just real, quiet recognition. This is how I felt today. This is what I avoided. This is what I wish I handled differently. These soft acknowledgements help the mind sort and soften. When emotion is met with presence, it passes. When it's ignored, it builds, and what builds eventually leaks into mood, first thing in the morning. The practices of mindfulness, metta, and reflection are not just calming, they're cleansing. When done consistently before sleep, they help reduce emotional humidity in the mind. The breath becomes the wind that clears the sky. The loving kindness becomes warmth that evaporates residue. The reflection becomes a balancing pressure system. This isn't poetic, it's energetic. The nervous system responds, hormones shift, and the atmosphere of the inner world changes with it. Dream content can also affect the mental climate, not the symbols, but the tone. A restless night of chaotic dreams doesn't just confuse memory, it leaves emotional residue. That residue becomes part of the waking experience. Buddhist traditions sometimes include dream yoga, not just for lucidity, but for purification. To recognize the illusion in dreams so the waking state can feel less heavy. Even without formal dream practice, remembering the dream's emotion and letting it pass through breath upon waking helps reset the mind's weather. Silence also plays a role. The level of stillness in sleep affects how quickly the mind heats up in the morning. If sleep is filled with noise, mental, emotional, environmental, the mind starts the next day already overstimulated. But when silence is honored before bed, when sleep happens in a calm space, the nervous system stays closer to its base rhythm, and that rhythm slows the momentum of thought. It allows clarity to return without effort. Food and breath shape the inner climate too. Overeating, eating too late, or consuming heavy content at night can leave the mind cloudy. These aren't moral issues, they're energetic. They affect digestion, breath patterns, even dream intensity. When breath is shallow during sleep, the mind tends to wake in tension. When breath is deep and natural, the emotional layer of thought becomes more fluid. So how does one prepare the mental forecast? First, reduce unnecessary input before bed. Not just screens, but overstimulation in general. The mind absorbs more than it seems to. Conversations, background noise, even subtle visual chaos can overload the mental field. Give it space. Second, invite stillness. This doesn't mean suppressing thoughts. It means pausing enough to feel what's present without judgment. A body scan, a few deep breaths, a moment of gratitude. Each act helps settle the internal systems. Third, plant something positive but gentle. Not fake positivity, not forced mantras, but real warmth. Thank you for this breath. May I rest well. May I release what's ready to go. These are not affirmations, they're intentions. They shape the inner atmosphere like soft wind shifts a sail. Fourth, upon waking, don't rush. Don't chase the first thought. Feel the weather. Ask, what's here? Not to judge, to meet it. If there's fog, don't try to clear it instantly. Let it lift naturally. If there's light, don't cling. Let it shine without grasping. Respond to the morning with the same softness you offered it the night before. Buddhist monks often start their day with bowing. Not for ritual alone, but to enter the day humbly. The act of bowing is a posture of acceptance. It says, whatever the sky of this mind holds today, I bow to it. I meet it fully. This attitude dissolves resistance, and resistance is what turns a cloudy mind into a storm. The most powerful insight is this. You don't need to control the weather. You just need to recognize that it's not you, that it changes, that it can be shaped through kindness, patience, and presence, and that each night offers a chance to reset the system, to open the windows of the inner world and let the old air move through, to lie down with care so the mind rises clean. So as you prepare for rest tonight, don't just aim for sleep. Prepare the sky, release what's been carried, invite what calms, let the breath clear what the mind forgot to, and trust that the subconscious listens, that the emotional forecast of the next day is already forming quietly through every breath you take now. When morning comes, meet whatever weather is there. If it's stormy, let it pass. If it's still, honor it. Either way, you are not the sky. You are the awareness that sees it, the space that holds it, the presence that doesn't change when clouds roll in. And that presence, trained through sleep, shaped by intention, supported by Buddhist wisdom, is the calm beneath every climate, the center point around which everything else moves. And that's what allows the day to begin, not just with light, but with clarity, not just with tasks, but with understanding, not just with breath, but with balance. The mind's weather, shaped during sleep by thoughts, emotions, and subtle karmic patterns, gives us a feeling before we have a thought. It influences our entire perception of the morning, but it isn't the whole story. Because underneath even the weather, behind the fog or clarity, before the craving or the breath, lies something even more untouched. A brief space, rarely noticed, where the ego hasn't returned yet. A space so silent it almost slips by unseen. But for those who have trained their awareness, that fleeting moment is everything. It's the mirror before waking, the place where the self, as we think we know it, hasn't yet been rebuilt. And to see into it, even for a breath, is to remember something deeper than identity. There's a unique quality to the seconds before full waking. The body stirs, the mind begins to shift, but the personality hasn't fully returned. The roles haven't reattached. The name isn't yet in place. And in that gap, between deep sleep and ego reactivation, there's a window, not metaphorically, but truly, a clean and unfiltered consciousness. Tibetan Buddhism has spent centuries studying this exact moment, not for scientific curiosity, but for liberation. This is where dream yoga points its focus, not just to manipulate dreams, but to dissolve the idea of a fixed self by observing the transitions most people sleep through. The ego doesn't return all at once. It creeps in, first as sensation, then as thought, then as a story, then as a full identity. What starts as neutral awareness quickly becomes, I am tired, or I need to get up, or I don't want to face today. But before that, there's something else. A state that isn't about thinking or labeling. It's pure presence. This is the mirror. Not a reflection of a personality, but a direct look at awareness before it picks up its mask. Most people miss it because they've never been trained to look. Waking happens fast. The ego rushes in like a wave. But if awareness is cultivated through the night, if the inner attention is stabilized using certain practices, that moment of pure consciousness can be recognized. And when it is, something shifts. Because in that state, the mind sees what it is without the filter. Not, I am aware, but simply awareness is. Tibetan Dream Yoga teaches practitioners to observe these transitions as sacred. Sleep, dream, waking, they are not separate. They are different expressions of the same awareness. The goal isn't just lucid dreaming. It's lucidity itself, a mind that sees clearly through all states. And the bridge between them is this moment before waking, when the body is ready to rise, but the self hasn't taken control. A breath, a pulse, a flash of presence before the story begins. Training to recognize this moment starts long before it arrives. It begins during the day through mindfulness, watching the mind build the self in real time. How one phrase from another person can trigger an entire identity reaction. How one task undone can flood the mind with self-judgment. These moments during waking life mirror what happens at the threshold of sleep and waking. The ego builds itself in pieces, and the more we see that process, the more we can catch it early. During sleep, awareness doesn't disappear. It simply shifts focus. If meditation is practiced consistently, especially right before rest, that awareness carries forward. It doesn't control the dream or the sleep, but it stays nearby. And in the early morning, as consciousness returns, it can slip into the gap between rest and reaction. A quiet witness, one that sees the ego before it speaks. This doesn't require belief. It requires consistency. One method taught in Dream Yoga is to repeat a simple intention before sleep. When I wake, I will notice the moment before thought, not with pressure, but with sincerity. This instruction becomes like a compass for the subconscious. It sets the inner orientation, and often, without forcing it, the awareness will catch a glimpse of that moment. Sometimes brief, sometimes longer, but enough to see that the self is not fixed. That identity is an arising, not a truth. What happens in this space isn't mystical. It's deeply grounded. The nervous system is calm. The thought stream hasn't begun. There's no pressure to define or explain anything, just being. This being is the mind in its original clarity. What Tibetan texts sometimes call the natural state. And while it may disappear quickly, the impression it leaves can last all day. Once this space is touched, even briefly, the way one responds to challenges shifts. Because the mind remembers that it doesn't have to build the ego each time, it can choose to rest in awareness instead. This doesn't remove responsibility, it removes attachment. And when attachment softens, clarity strengthens. Another way to strengthen recognition is to keep awareness lightly engaged during the moments between sleep cycles. Often in the early morning hours, there's a drift in and out of lighter sleep. These moments are opportunities, not to think, but to feel, to observe. Is there tension? Is there emotion? Is the self already present? Or is there just presence? These subtle states are powerful because they reveal the mechanics of identity. The mind learns to see not just the thoughts, but the builder of the thoughts. And in seeing that, it loosens. There's no need to grip, no need to rush, just to return to awareness over and over. Breath can anchor this process, not by focusing on it tightly, but by allowing it to guide the attention. Each inhale is a new arising, each exhale a gentle letting go. When waking begins, attention can rest on the breath rather than the name, the role, or the task. This doesn't delay waking, it deepens it. It turns the transition into a practice. The beauty of this moment is that it's available every day. No retreat required, no special conditions, just a willingness to observe the space before the mask returns, a willingness to let waking be slow, even if it's just one breath of awareness before the identity rushes in. That breath changes the inner landscape. In Tibetan traditions, this is likened to recognizing the mirror before the reflection fills it. The mirror is always there, but most only ever see the images. To see the mirror itself, even once, is to know a peace that doesn't depend on content, a clarity that exists before any opinion, fear, or plan. This practice also creates gentleness. When the ego isn't rushed back into place, the morning becomes softer, less reactive. There's less pressure to perform, more space to respond. This is not laziness, it's precision, starting the day with clear awareness rather than mental autopilot. Even if the moment is missed, the intention to see it begins to shift the structure of waking. The ego becomes more transparent. The thoughts feel less like facts. The reactions feel less automatic. Over time, identity feels more like a costume worn lightly rather than a burden carried endlessly. And this lightness carries forward into conversation, into decision-making, into moments of stress, because the mind knows that just behind the noise there's a mirror, and that mirror doesn't react. It reflects, it receives, it remains. So tonight, before sleep, speak to the mind, not with force, just with honesty. Let me notice the moment before waking. Let that be your direction, not to achieve, but to remember that before the name returns, before the self claims the day, there is a space, and that space is not empty. It is the most honest reflection of what you are. When morning comes, open your eyes slowly. Feel the breath before the thought. Feel the presence before the personality. Let the mirror be seen, even briefly, and know that this seeing is enough to begin the day in clarity, without weight, in truth, without tension, in awareness, without ego. The mirror before waking reflects something pure, something untouched by the usual weight of identity. But that moment passes quickly, and after it fades, what rises next isn't always a conscious choice. It's momentum. It's decisions being made before we realize we're choosing. Reactions appearing faster than thoughts, the way we speak, move, respond, all unfolding as if already written. And, in a way, they are. Because even when the body is resting and the mind seems still, something deep beneath is preparing the day ahead. Sleep doesn't just restore energy, it reshapes tendencies. And most people don't realize it until they wake up feeling like they're already halfway through patterns they never intended to start. This is what it means to sleepwalk through life. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. The choices we believe we make are often shaped long before they reach the surface, and Buddhist teachings on karma explain why. Karma isn't about punishment or fate, it's about formation. It's the way small actions, repeated without awareness, become grooves in the mind. And those grooves don't disappear when we sleep. They deepen, they embed, they become the default setting the moment we open our eyes. That's why we can wake up and find ourselves feeling the same stress, reacting the same way, repeating the same arguments, without realizing we're not starting the day fresh. We're continuing a script written when we weren't looking. This is why pre-sleep intention matters so much, because it's not just about what we want to feel, it's about what we're teaching the mind to become. The hours of rest are not inactive, they're formative, and the quality of what's planted in the subconscious just before sleep quietly begins shaping how we think, feel, and decide the next morning, not in dramatic flashes, but in tiny automatic movements of mind that go unnoticed. Until we stop and wonder, why do I keep doing this? Buddhist practice doesn't offer blame. It offers clarity. It shows how these automatic choices come from seeds we've been watering, often without knowing. A single thought, like frustration towards someone, can get replayed mentally right before sleep. The mind, being impressionable, absorbs it. And then, the next day, we're short with them, not because of what they said today, but because of what we carried from yesterday. That is karmic echo, and it starts forming during rest. Every mental habit we carry, whether kindness or irritation, patience or impatience, grows stronger when left unexamined. Sleep is not the end of these patterns. It's where they settle deeper. The Abidharma explains this process in detail, showing how mental formations, sankharas, continue to unfold in subtle layers even during unconscious states. The mind rehearses what it's been given, so when we fall asleep anxious, it practices anxiety. When we sleep angry, it carries that residue into the next set of perceptions. But when we sleep with mindfulness, the patterns begin to change. Pre-sleep intention is a way of gently reprogramming this entire cycle. It doesn't need to be complex. It needs to be honest. A simple acknowledgement of what we wish to let go. A quiet setting of direction. May I wake with peace, or may I meet tomorrow with clarity. These small offerings to the subconscious are not magic spells, they are instructions. The mind listens, especially when it's quiet, especially right before letting go of thought. This is why the last few minutes before sleep are so powerful. The body relaxes, and the critical part of the mind softens. This creates a space where suggestions settle more deeply. And the suggestions don't have to be words. They can be breath, a body scan, a recollection of compassion. All of these serve as messages. This is what matters now. And when practiced consistently, the mind starts to mirror that direction, not with instant transformation, but with quiet momentum. Over time, these nightly intentions begin to shift the way we make choices. We don't wake up and suddenly become a different person, but we begin to respond instead of react. We start noticing the pause before an old habit kicks in. We find ourselves reaching for calm where we used to grab frustration, not because we're trying harder, but because the default settings have changed. The programming has been updated. The autopilot has been rewritten. This process is slow, but deeply reliable. Because karma is like clay. It hardens with neglect, but reshapes with care. Each night becomes an opportunity to soften the mold, to press new impressions into the mind, to teach it, gently, what to carry forward and what to release. One way to make this more effective is to align intention with felt experience. Instead of just thinking, "I want to be kind," bring to mind a moment where kindness felt natural. Let that feeling be the last thing the mind touches before rest. Let it imprint not just as a concept, but as a sensation. This helps the subconscious understand not just what to aim for, but how it feels when it's happening. Another helpful step is to release the grip on self-narratives before sleep. Often, the ego tries to wrap up the day with conclusions. What went wrong? Who to blame? How we failed? But these conclusions are not closure. They're rehearsals, and when left unchecked, they harden into habits that show up as the emotional tone of the next day. Dropping these stories doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means ending the day without carrying the weight into tomorrow. A simple practice is to end with gratitude, not in a forced way, but by gently scanning the day for anything that softened the heart. A kind word, a moment of silence, a breath. Gratitude isn't about being positive, it's about being whole. And wholeness is what rewires reaction. The teachings also suggest cultivating specific ethical reflections before sleep, not as judgment, but as recalibration. Was I honest today? Did I speak with care? Did I act with intention? These questions don't exist to shame. They exist to bring the mind back into alignment with truth. And when truth is reflected on gently, it begins to reshape future behavior without force, without fear. The unconscious doesn't need pressure. It needs direction. A soft, consistent reminder that peace is possible, that awareness is available, that we can act from wisdom instead of habit. And when this reminder is given night after night, it starts becoming real. Even in moments when we forget, the new path has already begun to form. Another layer to this is forgiveness, not just of others, but of ourselves. Mistakes made during the day often get replayed during sleep, not always in dreams, but in emotion. That replay becomes a script. Forgiveness interrupts it. A simple, quiet phrase, "I forgive what I didn't know," or "I allow myself to grow," breaks the loop. And in breaking the loop, the mind releases the pressure to repeat the pattern tomorrow. Buddhist practice isn't about perfection. It's about presence. And presence, when applied to sleep, becomes preparation. Each night becomes a soft rehearsal for a more intentional morning. Each moment of mindfulness before rest becomes a seed, and each seed, when planted with sincerity, begins to shift the soil of our choices. Even the dreams begin to change, not always in story, but in tone. Less frantic, less scattered, more symbolic, more meaningful. The subconscious doesn't just follow the day, it starts leading it, because it's been given new material, a new model, one rooted not in reaction, but in awareness. And slowly, mornings feel different. Not because everything is easy, but because the mind feels less compelled to repeat. The habits feel less automatic, the stories feel less urgent. There's more room, more breath, more clarity. To sleepwalk through life is to forget that every choice is shaped long before it's made. To wake with presence is to remember that nothing is fixed, that even in rest, the mind is listening, and what it hears, it becomes. So tonight, Speak softly to the part of you that remembers, the part beneath the habits. Offer it clarity, offer it care, offer it the simple truth. You don't need to repeat what no longer serves. Then, rest. Let the patterns loosen. Let the breath guide. Let the karma reshape. And when morning comes, you'll walk not through an old script, but through a new possibility. One you've already begun to choose without even realizing it. The patterns that shape your next morning begin quietly, long before the sun rises. They're not decided by willpower. They're formed by what you allow into the silent hours. Thought loops, emotional habits, karmic tendencies, they all echo through the night, settling into your body and mind, preparing your first reactions long before you take your first step out of bed. But there's one force more ancient than habit, more reliable than thought. It's the breath. Always there, always guiding, always willing to lead you back to the present if you let it. Not just while awake, but during the hours when the conscious mind steps back. And how you breathe through the night becomes the atmosphere you wake into. This is the breath that follows you to sunrise, and if trained with care, it becomes the deepest teacher in the dark. The Satipatthana Sutta, one of the Buddha's most foundational teachings, begins not with theory, but with the breath. It doesn't ask you to believe. It asks you to observe. The breath in, the breath out. Long, short, deep, shallow. Not to control it, but to know it. And this knowing begins to build awareness that isn't tied to opinion, identity, or desire. It's tied to what's real, what's here. And when this breath awareness is established during the day, it naturally carries into sleep. Breathing is one of the only bridges between conscious and unconscious mind. While most bodily functions are automatic, the breath can be watched. It can be guided. It can be gently shaped without forcing. And when done with awareness before sleep, it begins to soften the whole nervous system. The body loosens, the mind quiets, but more importantly, the breath carries a message into the night. Stay present, stay gentle, stay aware. What follows is not control over sleep, but influence. A soft reshaping of the terrain the mind travels while unconscious. Mindful breathing doesn't stop dreams. It doesn't eliminate thoughts, but it changes how deeply they land. It slows the reaction to inner noise. It reduces the intensity of emotional loops, because the breath tells the body, even in sleep, there is no danger. There is no need to prepare for conflict. There is only now. When you breathe with presence before sleep, you're not just calming the mind, you're training the subconscious. The rhythm of breath becomes the rhythm of inner experience. It sets a tone. A slow inhale sends a signal. You are safe. A smooth exhale signals release. Not in concept, in sensation, and the body remembers that sensation even when the thinking mind steps away. Science now supports what Buddhism has taught for centuries. Deep, rhythmic breathing influences heart rate variability, lowers cortisol, and activates the parasympathetic nervous system. But Buddhist wisdom goes further. It doesn't just look at the body, it points to awareness. It says, don't just use the breath to relax, use it to wake up, not from sleep, but from the trance of disconnection, from the habit of rushing through your own inner world, from the pattern of only being conscious in the daylight. The breath can be your anchor through all stages of sleep. If awareness is gently kept on the breath, As you drift into unconsciousness, even partial continuity of attention will shift the dream landscape. You'll begin to notice that not all dreams feel as chaotic. You might start recognizing you're dreaming while you're dreaming, or wake with a sense of calm, even when the content of the dream was emotional. That's because the breath was still there, and it remembered how to guide you back. This doesn't require perfect concentration, it just requires consistency. Even if you fall asleep after only a few breaths, those few breaths are powerful. They tell the body that attention still matters, that care is still being offered, and that message reverberates through the layers of the mind. The reason many people wake up anxious isn't because of their alarm clock. It's because their body has been breathing shallow and fast all night, responding to dreams, stress, or poor posture. The breath, having been ignored, follows the rhythm of reactivity, and that rhythm becomes the default setting when the eyes open. But when breath is trained to stay smooth, to stay present, even in sleep, waking up feels different. There's less panic, less tightness, more spaciousness. In traditional Buddhist practice, monks and meditators are often taught to fall asleep with a slight awareness of the breath at the nostrils or the rise and fall of the belly. Not with tension, with softness. The breath becomes not a task, but a companion, a gentle tether that keeps the mind from drifting too far into chaos. And even if full awareness isn't maintained all night, that brief moment of clarity at the edge of sleep makes a difference. It sets a tone. It plants a seed. This seed then shapes how the brain organizes memory, how it processes emotion, how it reacts upon waking. You may find that your responses to people in the morning are slower, but more thoughtful. That irritation takes longer to surface, that you listen before reacting, not because you tried, because the breath was there first. It shaped the energy before the thought. Satipatthana practice teaches not just mindfulness of breath, but mindfulness with breath as a foundation, watching it without owning it, feeling it without altering it, letting it be exactly as it is, moment after moment. This surrender creates peace, not by changing the breath, but by no longer resisting it. Breathing this way before sleep tells the subconscious there is no need to run. And in that stillness, the layers of the mind begin to loosen. The sense of a fixed self softens. The boundaries between watcher and watched blur. You begin to sense not just the breath, but the space it flows through. That space is awareness, and that awareness follows you into the morning. There's also a deeper gift in this practice. When waking up with breath still present, you begin to notice the mind's movements more clearly. The first thought doesn't pull you. The first emotion doesn't control you, because there's space now. Space between impulse and action, between feeling and reaction. This space is what makes clarity possible. It's the difference between reacting blindly and responding with care. This is what it means to wake up with the breath, not just breathing, but aware of breath, feeling it return, letting it guide the first moment of the day. And when that happens, something remarkable unfolds. The breath that ended the day with peace is the same breath that begins the new one with presence. One way to deepen this connection is to set a simple intention just before sleep. May I breathe with awareness through the night. This doesn't mean you'll stay conscious all night. It means your last instruction to the mind is presence. That instruction, repeated each night, begins to settle into the subconscious, and the breath remembers. You can also return to the breath the moment you wake. Before looking at your phone, before speaking, before moving. Just a single inhale, felt fully. A single exhale, released completely. That moment re-establishes the path. It reconnects you to the training. It turns a habit into a practice. The Satipatthana doesn't say you must master the breath. It says, begin with the breath. Let it show you what's happening. Let it carry you gently through sleep and return you quietly to presence in the morning. That rhythm, simple, ancient, personal, becomes your most reliable guide. When practiced over time, this breath changes your relationship to stress. It no longer builds unnoticed. It's seen sooner, released faster. The body remembers how to calm itself. The mind remembers how to slow down. All because the breath was honored in the silent hours when no one was watching. And this isn't limited to monks or meditators. Anyone can do this. Any night, any bed, any breath. You don't need incense or a shrine, just presence, just sincerity, just the willingness to end the day, not in distraction, but in return, to let the breath lead again and again, until it follows you not just to sunrise, but through everything that follows. Because when the breath is steady, the mind is less shaken. When the breath is present, the self is less scattered. And when the breath is known, the world becomes more quiet, not because it changes, but because you are meeting it from the center. So tonight, before sleep takes you, breathe. Not to fall asleep faster, but to fall into yourself more fully, to let go without collapsing, to rest without forgetting, to train the quietest part of the mind to stay with you, to stay awake even while the world goes dark. And when the sun rises again, let the breath rise first. Let it greet the morning before your name returns. Let it hold you before the world makes demands. That is your anchor, your teacher, your first and last companion, the breath that follows you to sunrise and never leaves. When breath becomes the quiet companion through sleep, when it guides the body and steadies the mind, waking begins from presence rather than pressure. But even as calm returns with the morning, there's something else waiting, something quieter, heavier. Not physical weight, but emotional drag, a stickiness that clings to the mind and slows the heart. It shows up as resistance, confusion, or that low-grade frustration with no clear cause. This is attachment, quiet, invisible, and deeply ingrained. Not always dramatic, but always present. And though it's usually thought of as something we fight through during the day, there's a deeper truth Buddhist practice reveals. Sleep itself can be used to soften it, not by running from it, but by turning rest into a journey. A pilgrimage inward, where awareness is carried through the night with the quiet goal of loosening the things we cling to the most. Attachment doesn't sleep. Even when the body is still, the stories continue. The mind keeps grasping, wanting, measuring, and those patterns don't fade because it's dark outside. They follow into dreams. They shape the emotional climate of sleep. They build momentum so that by morning, the mind is already holding on, often before the eyes are even open. But when awareness is placed intentionally before rest, the experience of sleep changes. It becomes less about escape and more about return. The mind begins to walk itself back from what it doesn't need, back from the beliefs it doesn't question, back from the identities it feels forced to protect. This is the inner pilgrimage. The journey through attachment doesn't begin with analysis. It begins with noticing. Most people carry a silent sense of heaviness without realizing where it comes from. They think it's just stress or fatigue, but often it's accumulation, emotional residue from the thousands of small attachments built throughout the day, to how someone looked at them, to what they didn't finish, to a version of themselves they think they must maintain. Each of these becomes a knot. And when sleep begins without awareness, those knots tighten. They sink deeper. They become part of the dream fabric and the waking habits. Buddhist reflection offers a path that doesn't demand force. It invites release. And sleep, when paired with the right attention, becomes the perfect terrain to explore this. Because during sleep, the conscious mind loses its grip. Identity is loosened, control is softened, and in that softness, it becomes possible to see what is normally hidden. Before this can happen, though, the intention must be clear. The mind needs a direction, not a goal, but a focus. This is where reflection enters, a simple contemplation before sleep. What am I still holding on to that I don't need? What story did I keep alive today that no longer serves me? These aren't questions to be solved before bed. They are questions that open the gate for deeper exploration. And when the mind falls into sleep, holding that inquiry, the subconscious begins to respond. The inner pilgrimage is not a straight path. It moves through layers, sometimes through vivid dreams, sometimes through formless quiet. But each night becomes a step, a shedding, a remembering. And the shedding doesn't feel like loss, it feels like lightness. A thought no longer feels as urgent, an emotion no longer sticks, a plan no longer defines your worth. This is how attachment begins to loosen, not with a loud moment, but through thousands of tiny dissolvings that happen when attention is present in the hours we usually overlook. Dreams become teachers in this process, not in their content, but in their structure. Dreams reveal how the mind holds on to form, how it builds meaning, how it tries to protect a sense of self that doesn't actually exist. And when seen clearly, this becomes a mirror. The clinging in dreams is the same clinging that happens during the day, the same chase, the same fear of loss. But in the dream state, there's an opportunity to interrupt it, to pause even in the middle of that pattern and remember, this isn't solid. This isn't who I am. Tibetan dream yoga teaches that this recognition, the realization that even the dream is a construct, can begin the path to liberation. Because if the mind can learn to let go within the dream, it begins to learn how to let go in waking life, not in theory, but in direct experience. And this changes how you carry yourself. You wake up not just rested, but freer, less convinced by every passing thought, less reactive to every rising emotion. But even without mastering lucid dreaming, this journey is available. Because what matters most isn't what happens in sleep. It's the clarity brought into it. Reflection, intention, and presence before bed create the conditions for transformation. The attachments begin to feel less necessary because the space between you and them grows. You start seeing that many of the things you fight to protect are illusions. That much of the suffering comes not from what's happening, but from the fear of letting go. This is why Buddhist teachers often remind us, attachment is not about having, it's about clinging. And clinging can happen even without objects. You can cling to an identity, to being seen a certain way, to being right, to being in control. And all of these clingings sink deeper when they are not examined. Sleep, however, provides a rare chance to step back, because when the ego softens, the grip weakens, and when awareness is present, that weakening is felt. Practicing this means ending the day with a soft question. What if I don't need to hold this anymore? It doesn't mean pushing it away. It means placing it down, just for the night, letting the breath come in, letting the emotion pass through without grabbing it, and falling into rest, not with force, but with surrender. Over time, these nightly reflections begin to shift behavior. Attachment is felt sooner. The tension around certain beliefs is noticed faster. The urge to control begins to seem less urgent, and not because of effort, but because the mind is being trained in a new rhythm, a rhythm of letting go. And this letting go is not the same as giving up. It's clarity. It's knowing what's real and what isn't, what's needed and what's habit, what's kind and what's fear. The inner pilgrimage teaches this not through ideas, but through experience. By walking through the inner world with presence, even while asleep. The process also reveals something deeper. Most of what we cling to, we do out of fear. Fear of emptiness, fear of meaninglessness, fear of change. But what the inner pilgrimage shows, night after night, is that emptiness isn't absence, it's space. And space is not scary when it's filled with awareness. In fact, it's the only place where true peace lives. This is the gift of using sleep for practice. It gives access to layers that daytime often hides. The mind becomes transparent, the fears become visible, and because the body is still, the defenses are lower. There's room to feel without fleeing, to see without reacting. And in that seeing, the grip on what was once essential begins to fade. So each night, when the body lies down, treat it like a temple. Let the breath be your guide. Let the questions be gentle. Let the attachments float to the surface without judgment. And then rest. Not in ignorance, but in quiet seeing, in curiosity, in trust. Let the journey begin not by going anywhere, but by returning. Returning to the part of you that was never holding on in the first place. The part that's always been here, always watching, always still. Because when you wake from sleep, having traveled that inner path, the morning feels different. The clutter doesn't stick. The tension doesn't build so fast. And even when you forget, something deeper in you remembers. You don't have to carry what isn't yours. That's the path. One breath at a time. One night at a time. A pilgrimage made not across miles, but across the heart, through the layers of attachment, into the space where freedom already lives. When sleep becomes an inner pilgrimage through attachment, when awareness is carried into the depths of unconscious habits and returns lighter, softer, less entangled, something begins to shift. The waking world no longer feels like a continuation of yesterday's patterns. It starts to feel like an opening, a beginning, a kind of quiet birth, not of a new body, but of a new mind, one that isn't owned by stories, shaped by clinging, or locked in repetition. And this is where one of the most liberating insights from Buddhist wisdom comes to life, not the idea of rebirth as mythology, but as a practice, a psychological truth. Each morning is a chance to be born again, not metaphorically, but experientially, not by denying the past, but by no longer dragging it forward. Buddhist teachings describe rebirth not only in terms of future lives, but in the way the mind continuously recreates itself. In each moment, each thought, each reaction, the self is reconstructed. And this reconstruction happens automatically unless awareness interrupts the cycle. The mind picks up where it left off, and the self rebuilds around yesterday's emotions, fears, opinions. But what if waking up didn't mean returning to the same identity? What if it became a moment of letting go so complete that it reset the internal narrative completely? That's the lotus of waking. A practice of emerging from rest as if nothing is owed, nothing is expected, nothing needs to be carried except awareness itself. The lotus, in Buddhist symbolism, grows from mud yet remains unstained. It blooms anew, even as its roots remain deep in the earth. This is the ideal relationship to mourning, to rise from the layers of subconscious experience, from dreams, from mental loops, and still meet the day clean. With no residue hardening the face, no old conclusions pressing against the mind, just presence. That's not accidental. It's trained. The practice begins not in the morning, but in how sleep is entered. As seen before, what the mind holds before sleep is what shapes how it emerges. If attachment has been softened, if intention has been offered, if breath has remained steady through the night, waking becomes less of a jolt and more of a blooming. The thoughts still return, but they no longer arrive with urgency. The feelings still stir, but they don't pull the self into story. There's space now, and in that space, a choice arises. Do I become yesterday's version again, or do I meet this moment as new? Choosing the latter requires more than motivation. It requires presence. The moment of waking is delicate. Most miss it entirely. The alarm goes off, the body moves, the identity rushes in. But with training, this moment can be paused, even for a breath, even for a blink. And in that pause, the mind can witness its own return. It can see the self being rebuilt and choose not to follow the same script. This doesn't mean losing memory or pretending that nothing matters. It means not allowing memory to define identity. It means noticing that pain from yesterday doesn't have to poison today unless we carry it forward. The lotus blooms by rising through the water, not by absorbing it. And in the same way, we can rise through our experience without being defined by it. This way of waking becomes a sacred routine. Before the phone, before conversation, before task, the breath is felt, the body is acknowledged. The first thought is noticed without clinging. Ah, this is what the mind offers today, not this is who I am. That distance creates clarity, and clarity becomes the root of compassion. When the self is seen as a process, not a possession, Other people are no longer seen as fixed either. Their moods are seen as weather, their actions as habits, not declarations of truth. This opens the door to a new kind of patience, not forced, but natural, because you've just watched yourself be reborn without effort. You know everything changes, and you know how quickly we forget that. In Buddhist psychology, this capacity to renew awareness is one of the most powerful tools for freedom. It removes the need for self-defense. It removes the grip of regret. Because if the self is new now, then yesterday's pain is not the identity. It's just a moment that passed. And this makes forgiveness possible, not because harm is erased, but because identity is no longer trapped in a single version of itself. The lotus of waking becomes a meditation. It teaches that silence isn't the absence of thought. It's the refusal to build identity from thought. You wake, you breathe, you feel, and you wait. Not passively, with attention. Let the mind offer its usual noise, but watch instead of react. This watching resets everything. The energy of the day that follows is directly shaped by that first moment. If waking is rushed, the nervous system is triggered. If identity reattaches too quickly, old defenses come online. But if the mind is met with kindness, with breath, with awareness, then even if difficulty arises later, the foundation is different. You don't react the same way. You return faster. You remember, this self is not solid. Some practitioners write a brief intention upon waking. A single sentence. Today I am not my past. Or, today is a new cycle. This isn't a slogan, it's a direction. A reminder that the self can be chosen moment by moment. Not in terms of appearance or personality, but in how we relate to the world. And when this practice becomes regular, the mornings stop feeling like obligations. They start feeling like invitations. Each day becomes a doorway, not to accomplish, but to arrive in presence, in freshness, in the quiet truth that nothing from yesterday has to define what this breath becomes. This practice also helps reduce the sense of stuckness. So many people carry the belief that change is hard, that transformation is rare. But this is because they are looking for external milestones. In truth, change is happening constantly beneath the surface, and waking becomes the proof. Each morning, you are not who you were. The body is different. The dreams were different. The mind has reorganized. And when this is seen clearly, hope returns. Because transformation is not something you earn, it's something you allow. The lotus of waking isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about greeting the return of consciousness with a soft touch instead of a clenched fist. It's about remembering that just because the mind offers a thought doesn't mean it must be followed. Just because the body feels tired doesn't mean the spirit is weak. There's always something deeper, something quieter, something watching. So the next time you wake, wait a little longer in that space. Let the breath rise before the thought. Let the body stretch before the identity speaks. Let the eyes open, not with resistance, but with curiosity. And ask, not with words, but with silence. Who will I be today, now that I know I don't have to be who I was? This isn't just inspiration, it's instruction. It's the practice of renewal, and every person is invited, no matter the past, no matter the weight. The lotus doesn't need permission to bloom, it just rises, again and again, just like you. When waking becomes a rebirth instead of a reaction, when the self is allowed to emerge without clinging to its old definitions, the morning no longer feels like a continuation of struggle. It becomes a quiet unfolding. But even in that openness, the heart often remains guarded. Even when the mind is clear, there's a distance that can still form between self and other, between presence and love. Because clarity alone doesn't guarantee warmth. Awareness doesn't always equal connection. And this is where another layer of practice becomes essential. The heart must also be trained to wake. Not just the body, not just the breath. The heart must learn to rise before the world demands anything of it. It must soften before any tension is projected onto it. And this softening begins not at sunrise, but in the dark. It begins before sleep, in silence, when no one is watching. It begins with compassion. Loving kindness meditation, or metta, is not about becoming a better person. It's not about performing goodness or forcing emotion. It's about remembering something that is already there. A warmth that has been buried beneath reactivity and protection. A wish for peace, first for oneself, then for others. This wish is simple, but powerful. And when cultivated just before sleep, it doesn't fade in the night. It ripens, it deepens, and by morning, it meets the world before the ego does. The practice is straightforward, but not always easy. The mind resists at first, especially when there is resentment or fatigue. But metta is not about feeling love, it's about offering love. It's about choosing the direction of the heart, even when emotion hasn't caught up. The phrases used are quiet suggestions. May I be safe. May I be free from suffering. May I rest with ease. And then extended to others. May you be happy. May you be at peace. These are not mantras to chant blindly. They are seeds, and the night is the soil. What makes this practice powerful during sleep is how the subconscious responds. The last emotional tone before unconsciousness often carries the most weight. When the mind drops into sleep with tension, it often carries that forward into the dreaming mind. But when it enters with compassion, even if only briefly, the heart begins to reorganize its habits. It becomes less reactive, more receptive, less afraid, more open. By the time morning arrives, this practice has done its work in silence. The first feelings that rise are no longer shaped by fear or control. They are softened by kindness. This doesn't mean everything is easy. It means the lens through which difficulty is seen becomes gentler. Instead of rushing into judgment or defense, there's a breath, a moment of patience, a glimpse of connection before separation takes over. This shift is subtle but profound. Many people wake and immediately brace for the day. They carry a quiet armor, preparing for challenge or disappointment. But metta softens that armor. It reminds the heart that it doesn't need to close first, that safety doesn't require separation, that openness is not weakness, it's strength. Practicing loving kindness before sleep also rewires memory. The brain consolidates emotional experiences during the night. When compassion is the last feeling held, the mind begins to prioritize it. It becomes easier to recall kindness, to notice warmth, to assume goodwill. These aren't psychological tricks. They're the natural outcomes of training perception. The beauty of this practice is that it doesn't require belief. It only requires consistency. A few minutes before rest. A few words repeated sincerely. And slowly, the inner atmosphere begins to shift. Bitterness doesn't grip as tightly. Annoyance fades faster. The default emotional setting becomes closer to ease. And what begins before sleep doesn't stay confined to the night. It follows into interactions, into self-talk, into the way strangers are seen, the way family is spoken to, the way tension is diffused without effort. Because the heart has already chosen its posture, it's already leaning toward softness. There's also something deeply healing about directing metta toward oneself. Many carry silent blame, invisible shame, or harsh inner dialogue. These don't vanish in sleep, they echo. But when met with kindness, they begin to lose their grip. May I be at peace isn't self-indulgence, it's medicine, a permission to no longer fight yourself. And when that peace is granted internally, it radiates outward without needing to be proven. The practice can also be expanded gradually, starting with oneself, then a loved one, then someone neutral, eventually even someone difficult. Not as a test, but as a gentle stretch. Each extension of metta teaches the heart that it's capable of more space, more forgiveness, more presence, and over time, this becomes natural, not something done, but something lived. This living compassion becomes especially important in the early morning hours. The space between sleep and full waking is tender. Often, unresolved emotions drift into that gap. But if compassion has already taken root, those emotions don't have the same impact. They are met with care instead of fear. And that changes how the day begins. Compassion is not an escape. It's a foundation. It allows pain to be seen without being drowned in it. It makes joy more expansive. It makes neutrality feel alive. And most importantly, it trains the nervous system to rest in connection rather than contraction. Science supports this too. Regular loving-kindness practice has been shown to increase positive affect, reduce stress, and strengthen emotional resilience. But long before science, Buddhist wisdom knew this. It knew that the heart, like the mind, must be trained, that peace is not just a mental clarity, but a warmth that reaches into relationship, identity, and intention. For those who feel numb or disconnected, metta can be the first step back, not by forcing emotion, but by planting direction. Even saying, "May I feel love again someday," is a doorway, a movement toward healing, and the night, being silent and safe, becomes the perfect place to begin. Some nights, the words may feel hollow. That's okay. The practice is still working. Compassion isn't about immediate feeling, it's about persistent offering. The heart hears it, the subconscious absorbs it, and in time, the feelings follow. The greatest gift of metta before sleep is how it meets you in the morning. When your eyes open and you've forgotten the practice, something remains. A trace of softness, a pause in the heart, a willingness to let others in. And that is no small thing. In a world that teaches speed, judgment, and division, to wake with kindness is radical. It is freedom. So tonight, before the body rests, invite the heart to stay open, just a little, just enough. Whisper the words. Mean them if you can. Offer them even if you can't. Then let sleep take you, not as escape, but as transformation. And let the heart walk ahead of the mind. Let it rise first. Let it be the part of you that meets the world before thought does. Because when compassion is what wakes first, everything else follows with more grace. And the day, no matter how ordinary, becomes a place where peace is possible, not because everything is easy, but because the heart is ready. When the heart wakes before the body, when compassion rises in the silence before the world begins speaking, something profound takes root. The morning doesn't just feel softer, it feels more humane, less rushed, less transactional. There's a wider space for presence, for pause, for grace. But even as loving kindness sets the tone, there's still a force many don't realize is shaping their every thought. Time, the ticking pressure, the countdowns, the mental math between the now and what's next. Before a single task begins, before the first sip of water or breath of morning air, the schedule enters the mind, and with it, a subtle tightening, a shift from being into becoming, from presence into pursuit. Time becomes the quiet master, and most don't question it. But Buddhist teachings do, especially those rooted in the principle of Akaliko, the timeless. A state of awareness that lives outside the clock, a practice of letting go of time before it begins controlling the day. This doesn't mean ignoring responsibilities or rejecting structure. It means releasing the psychological grip time has on the mind. Because it's not the schedule that causes suffering, it's the way we believe we're running out of something, that every moment must prove something, that rest is earned, that enough is never now. This belief is so ingrained, it shows up in how we breathe, how we plan, how we treat ourselves, and it shows up before the day even starts. The transition from sleep into time consciousness is abrupt. One moment, the mind is floating in timeless rest. The next, it's calculating the minutes left to prepare, to respond, to act. This sudden shift creates tension. It triggers the nervous system, the heart rate rises, the breath shortens, and clarity is replaced by urgency, even if nothing urgent is actually happening. The practice of Akaliko invites a different rhythm. It says presence is not on a clock, that what's real isn't measured in hours. It teaches that the mind can function with full attention even when it isn't obsessed with time. And sleep is the perfect place to start training this, because sleep is naturally timeless. It doesn't unfold in hours, it unfolds in states. The body doesn't need to know what time it is to heal. The mind doesn't need to measure to reset. Time exists for coordination, not for identity. Before sleep, one can begin to loosen the attachment to time by letting go of the need to be productive, releasing the idea that tomorrow must be maximized. That rest is only valuable if it prepares us to achieve. The breath becomes a teacher in this. The breath doesn't hurry. It doesn't rush toward the next one. It's complete exactly as it is. This is timeless awareness in its simplest form. It's not about stretching time, it's about stepping outside of its demands. During sleep, if the mind enters with a sense of urgency, the subconscious carries that pace. It moves faster. Dreams become more scattered. The body stays tense. But if the mind enters rest with no timeline, no goal for sleep, no pressure to wake feeling perfect, then the nervous system drops deeper, and the subconscious begins to rest, not just physically, but existentially. It remembers that peace doesn't require measurement. Waking with this kind of spaciousness feels different. The alarm might still ring, the obligations might still wait, but the inner world isn't chasing the clock. There's a moment before reaching for the phone, before checking the time, when the breath is felt fully. That moment stretches. It creates a softness between thought and task, a chance to ask, what matters right now? Not, what time is it? This simple shift in attention opens the doorway to a more spacious morning. A morning where the first impulse isn't planning but witnessing, where time doesn't push but passes quietly in the background. It's not denial, it's freedom. Freedom from the belief that every second is a test, that every hour must be filled to count. The Buddha's teachings on Akaliko often appear in descriptions of the Dhamma itself, truth that is beyond time. Truth that can be known immediately, regardless of era or circumstance. This same principle can be brought into daily life, not by abandoning time, but by remembering that awareness doesn't belong to it, that the part of you that sees thought, that feels the breath, that offers compassion, that part has no clock. It's always now. Integrating this into waking life starts with intention, a soft recognition before bed. I am not bound by time, a small release of the grip, a willingness to let the morning arrive not as an obligation, but as an emergence. This doesn't stop the clock from ticking, but it changes how the ticking is heard. It becomes background, not pressure. Practicing timeless awareness doesn't make one passive, it makes one precise. Because action taken from spacious presence is more effective than action taken from anxiety. You don't lose time by releasing the obsession with it. You gain clarity, you gain rhythm, you remember how to move from stillness instead of stress. One of the ways to maintain this after waking is through clock-free minutes. The first 5 minutes without checking the time, just moving with breath, with body, with attention, no calculating, no judging how long anything takes. This resets the nervous system. It interrupts the habit of panic. It trains the mind to trust something deeper than the schedule. Another layer is questioning the stories we tell about time. I'm running out of time. I wasted the day. I don't have enough hours. These thoughts feel factual, but they are often reflections of fear. The fear of not being enough, not doing enough, not achieving fast enough. But Akaliko teaches that presence is never late, that enough doesn't live on a timeline. This practice also changes how we relate to others. When we're not measuring every moment, we listen differently. We're not waiting for people to finish so we can move on. We're with them fully. And that presence is felt. It deepens connection. It heals urgency in relationships. It makes space for real conversation, not just efficient communication. Even rest becomes deeper, because it's not squeezed between tasks. It's honored, even if only for a few seconds. Those seconds, free from pressure, restore more than hours filled with worry. And those seconds are always available, right now, in the breath, in the pause between thoughts, in the smile that doesn't need a reason. The deeper realization is that timelessness isn't something to reach. It's something to remember. It's already here, covered by layers of scheduling, planning, counting. But underneath, there's just now, always now. And when this is seen, not once, but again and again, the grip of time weakens, the rush softens, and what remains is life as it is, alive, whole, complete. So tonight, before sleep, set down the clock. Not literally, but mentally. Let the breath be the measure. Let the heart be the rhythm. Let the night unfold without needing to track it. And when morning comes, step into it like a field, not a finish line. Let time pass, but don't let it push. Let it flow around you, not through you. Because you are not late, you are not behind, you are here. And that is where peace begins. When the grip of time begins to loosen, when the day isn't owned by the clock, but carried by breath and presence, a kind of freedom opens that most people never touch. It's not about doing less, it's about living from stillness. But even when the pressure of time is released, something else remains, quieter, more deeply rooted. A rhythm of thought and belief that runs beneath the surface. It appears in the way we see ourselves, the way we assume what others mean, the roles we rush to play. These patterns don't start when we wake. They start earlier. They echo through the night. And the place where they reveal themselves most clearly is the dream world. Not just random stories, not just shadows, but messages, reflections of the traps we walk in while awake, and when seen clearly, they become teachings, not illusions to fear, but signs pointing to where the mind still clings. These are the echoes of samsara. Samsara, in Buddhist understanding, is not just a cycle of birth and death. It's a cycle of perception, a wheel turning in the mind, over and over, creating suffering through craving, aversion, and delusion. That cycle doesn't stop at night. It carries into sleep. The same grasping appears in different clothes. The same fear shows up with different faces. And though the rules of the dream may change, the tendencies remain. This is why dreams are a doorway to insight, not because they predict, but because they reflect. Buddhist dream analysis doesn't treat dreams as random. It treats them as karmic expressions, unfiltered views of the mental formations we live with all day. During waking hours, we can hide our insecurities, repress our anger, pretend to be in control. But in dreams, the mind speaks more directly. It drops the masks. It exposes where we're stuck. And if approached with attention, this exposure becomes a gift. The most common patterns that appear in dreams are rooted in the same mental habits that keep samsara turning while we're awake. Chasing something we can't catch, being chased by something we fear, trying to fix what keeps breaking, searching for someone who keeps disappearing. These stories repeat, not because of dream logic, but because of mental inertia. The dream world becomes a mirror, and it reflects exactly what the mind has practiced during the day. When the dream is filled with restlessness, it's usually because the waking mind hasn't rested. When the dream is filled with conflict, it often reflects unresolved tension. And when the dream is full of searching, it shows how little peace we allow ourselves to feel. This is not meant to judge, it's meant to reveal, because the more we understand our dreams, the more clearly we can see what needs to be released in waking life. One of the most direct teachings from dream analysis is this: the dreamer believes the dream is real until waking. And in exactly the same way, we believe our waking interpretations are real until insight arises. This parallel is powerful. It teaches that clarity isn't a switch. It's a waking up from a deeper misunderstanding. The ego that feels threatened in a dream is the same ego that feels threatened at work. The identity that defends itself in sleep is the same identity that fears criticism in the day. The roles, the expectations, the shame, it's all samsara. Whether asleep or awake, it operates the same. But awareness can change this. Not by controlling dreams, but by noticing what they're pointing to. A dream of falling might show how much pressure we place on ourselves to succeed. A dream of being exposed might reflect our fear of judgment. A dream of arguing could point to suppressed anger. These aren't puzzles to decode, they're habits to observe. And when seen clearly, the mind begins to soften. The practice doesn't require remembering every detail. It requires remembering the emotion. How did the dream feel? What belief was running underneath it? Was there fear, urgency, helplessness? And does that emotion mirror something familiar from the day? That's where the learning is, not in the story, but in the flavor of the experience. Many advanced Buddhist practitioners use dream yoga to deepen this awareness. They train the mind to recognize dreaming as it's happening. This lucidity allows them to investigate the illusion while it unfolds. But even without such training, everyone can benefit from reflective attention. Simply writing down a dream upon waking. Feeling the tone. Asking gently, what does this remind me of in waking life? These questions open the door. What's found behind that door isn't always pleasant, but it's always honest. Because the subconscious doesn't perform. It reveals. And if met with compassion, this revelation becomes transformation. We begin to see that many of the things we think we need, recognition, control, certainty, are just the same dreams, repeated in daylight. The key insight from Buddhist dream work is this. The problem is not the dream. The problem is the identification. Believing we are the one running, the one failing, the one unworthy. But when the mind steps back, even slightly, it begins to see the pattern, not just the plot. And that distance creates room for liberation. This dream reflection also helps reduce fear. Nightmares become less terrifying when seen as expressions of stuck energy. Anxiety dreams become less punishing when recognized as habit rather than prophecy. Even pleasant dreams, when seen clearly, teach the same lesson, impermanence. They rise and pass, just like every moment of waking life. This insight returns power to the practitioner, because now sleep is not just a place of rest, it's a classroom. The mind becomes the teacher. The stories become lessons. The emotions become signs. And every morning becomes a chance to apply the wisdom gained while the world was quiet. By integrating this awareness, something else shifts. We begin to respond to waking life more consciously. We catch the same thoughts that caused fear in dreams. We notice the same urges to chase or run. And because we've seen them in that raw form, we can meet them with more compassion, more patience, more clarity. The boundary between waking and dreaming begins to dissolve. Not in a confused way, but in a liberating one. Because now the mind is seen clearly in all its expressions, and once seen, the illusion no longer holds the same weight. This practice also deepens presence. Dreams often show us how distracted we've become, how much our attention is fractured. But by witnessing that directly, we begin to reclaim that attention. We start listening more deeply, speaking more gently, choosing more wisely, because we remember how easily the mind gets swept away and how good it feels to come home to awareness. So tonight, as sleep approaches, prepare not just to rest, but to learn. Set an intention. May my dreams teach me what I need to see, not as command, but as openness. Let the night become sacred. Let the stories unfold. Let the feelings rise. And then, when morning returns, let the first breath hold space for what was revealed. Write what you remember. Reflect without judgment. Notice the patterns. Thank the mind for showing you its inner world. And carry that insight forward, not as weight, but as lightness, as the kind of clarity that doesn't just come from meditation, but from watching the very place where samsara hides and offers itself to be seen. Because in those echoes of samsara, there is wisdom waiting, not to frighten, but to free. And every night is another chance to listen, to see, to wake up, not just in the morning, but in the middle of the dream, until even waking life becomes another dream gently watched, another illusion met with clarity, another moment softened by awareness. When dreams become teachers and reveal the mental patterns we carry without noticing, when samsara begins to echo clearly enough for us to recognize it, something rare begins to emerge. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet shift in how we meet the moment. A kind of clarity that doesn't explain itself, it doesn't argue, it doesn't compete with thoughts. It waits. Just beneath the surface of waking, before the stories start up again, there's a subtle voice. Not a sound, but a knowing, a direct sense of what is true, before the mind interferes. This is the voice before thought, and it's one of the most easily missed forms of insight we have. Most people open their eyes and are immediately flooded with mental noise, planning, remembering, judging, predicting. That flood drowns the whisper. The clarity that was already present gets buried under urgency. But the voice is always there. Just before the mind wakes fully, there's a space, a sliver of silence. If it's entered gently, it offers guidance, not in words, but in a felt sense, a direction, a yes or no without explanation, a sense of knowing without effort. This voice isn't mystical, it's natural, but years of ignoring it have made it unfamiliar. Buddhist practice doesn't chase it. It creates conditions for it to be heard. Through silence, through presence, through the discipline of not rushing into thinking. The more space you make in the moments before waking, the clearer this voice becomes. It often arrives in that in-between state, where the body is still quiet and the mind hasn't gathered its routines. In that moment, awareness exists without filter. It doesn't need to understand. It simply sees. And what it sees is not a problem to solve, but a simplicity to trust. It may show up as the impulse to rest longer, to reach out to someone, to change a decision, or to let go of something you've been holding far too tightly. And when you act on it, there's often a strange peace that follows, not pride, not certainty, just ease. This clarity doesn't argue with thought. It doesn't fight. That's why it's missed. It doesn't repeat itself. It doesn't raise its volume. It's more like the sky than the wind, always present, but only seen when we look up from the noise. Buddhist silence practices train this attention. They don't give you new truths. They show you what you've been stepping over. They sharpen the ability to feel what's already clear before the mind edits it. This is what happens during retreats where speech is paused for days. At first, the mind becomes louder. The thoughts seem unbearable. But slowly, something else emerges. A steadiness, a clarity that doesn't move. And that same quality exists in the mornings if we pause before grabbing the first thought. One way to strengthen this is through intentional stillness after waking, not forcing the mind to be quiet, just listening. What's here before thought begins? What is already known before explanation arises? That listening requires no judgment. It doesn't need to make sense. It just needs to be sincere. You may find that this voice carries qualities you rarely associate with your normal mind. It is calm without effort. It is gentle without fear. It does not panic. It does not justify. It simply reveals. And the more often you listen, the more clearly it speaks. Another way to attune to this clarity is to notice the difference between reaction and recognition. Reaction comes fast, with energy and emotion. Recognition feels like it's always been true. It doesn't come with tension, it comes with stillness, and when met with presence, it begins to become the center of your decisions. This clarity also lives in the body, not in sensations of pain or pleasure, but in the subtle alignment of attention. When you're listening to the voice before thought, the body often relaxes. The breath deepens, the eyes soften. These are signals, not guarantees, but signs that you're moving closer to center. Silence is not about removing sound. It's about removing resistance to hearing. Buddhist silence isn't passive. It's awake. It's an active turning toward the moment, without needing it to become anything. And in that state, the voice before thought becomes easier to detect, because there's less debris in the way. This clarity doesn't arrive with full sentences. It doesn't explain its logic. It's more like a compass than a map. It points. It doesn't predict. And the trust required to follow it must be built over time. The more you act on it, the more you realize it's always been reliable. Not always easy, but always true. Some people confuse this clarity with impulse, but they are not the same. Impulse is fast, emotionally charged, often laced with craving or avoidance. The voice before thought is slower, deeper, and free of agenda. It arises when the mind is not reaching for something, but resting in something. This voice is available at other times too, not just in the morning. It arises in pauses, in the quiet after an exhale, in the stillness before speaking, in the breath before deciding. But the early morning is often the clearest window because the self hasn't fully reassembled. The defenses are down, the thoughts haven't picked up speed. That's why training to listen in those first few moments is so powerful. Letting this voice guide your day doesn't mean abandoning thought. It means grounding it. It means allowing clarity to lead before analysis fills in the details. Thought becomes a tool, not a master. and you begin to make decisions not from pressure, but from peace. This practice also reduces regret, because the more you listen to this voice, the less often you betray yourself, the less often you ignore your own inner truth. And when you don't betray yourself, you don't carry the same weight. The mind becomes lighter, more stable, more sincere. To prepare for hearing this voice, the night before becomes essential. How you fall asleep shapes how you wake. If you enter rest with noise, the mind wakes tangled. But if you sleep with awareness, the first light of morning touches a quieter field, a field where the voice is already waiting. So before you fall asleep, set the intention. Let me hear what's clear in the morning, not as a demand, as a direction. Let that intention carry into the silence of night. Let it sit beneath your dreams. And when the first awareness rises, don't rush. Listen. Let the thoughts come, but look underneath them. What is already known, what is quietly true, and then follow it. Even if it doesn't make sense yet, even if it asks for patience, because that voice, that clarity, that whisper before thought, it's not just your wisdom, it's your original nature, the part of you that sees without fear, that speaks without confusion, that knows before you remember. Keep returning to that space, not to escape the world, but to meet it more clearly. Because once you learn to hear the voice before thought, you begin to live not from habit, but from depth. And depth never leads you astray. It leads you home. When the voice before thought becomes familiar, when that quiet clarity is heard before the noise of the day builds momentum, waking starts to feel different. It no longer begins with confusion. It begins with recognition. But even with this clarity present, another kind of struggle often appears. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply embedded. A tension between stillness and obligation, between comfort and effort, between the wish to stay wrapped in rest and the push to meet the world. It shows up in the resistance to waking, in the tension around the alarm, in the story that says rising must feel like a fight. And for many, that's how the day starts, not from peace, but from battle, from dragging the body into motion, from pulling the mind into a pace it doesn't want. But what if that struggle isn't necessary? What if the fight is a habit, not a requirement? Buddhism points to an answer, not through discipline alone, but through a different kind of relationship with resistance itself. The alarm clock isn't the problem. It's the internal story about what waking means that creates the suffering. The belief that waking is an interruption, that it steals comfort, that it signals the end of peace and the beginning of pressure. These ideas aren't facts, they're patterns, and they can be unlearned. Buddhist practice teaches that suffering arises not from what happens, but from how we meet it. And that includes the first moment of waking. When we resist the moment, we turn neutral experience into pain. The body feels heavy, not because it must, but because we reject its slowness. The thoughts feel overwhelming, not because they're dangerous, but because we try to stop them. The alarm becomes an enemy, not because of its sound, but because we frame it as an attack on freedom. Reframing this moment begins with acceptance, not resignation. Acceptance is not the same as giving up. It's the choice to meet reality without trying to make it something else. When waking becomes a moment of acceptance, everything shifts. The body may still feel tired, the mind may still hesitate, but there's no fight, no judgment, just presence. And from presence, movement becomes possible, not through force, but through cooperation. This is why Buddhist monks often rise before sunrise without alarm clocks. It's not because they have superhuman discipline, it's because their relationship with waking is different. Rising is part of the practice. It's not something to escape. It's something to enter with awareness. And that awareness softens the struggle. The resistance to waking is often built on deeper layers of avoidance. Avoiding the day, avoiding discomfort, avoiding what we haven't resolved. But the mind doesn't become lighter by avoiding. It becomes heavier. Each act of resistance creates more tension, and that tension becomes the emotional tone of the day. To end the battle with the alarm clock is to begin the day from a different baseline, one where the first act is not struggle, but letting go. Letting go of the story that waking must feel bad. Letting go of the belief that effort must hurt. Letting go of the idea that rest and action cannot coexist. One practical way to shift this is through soft awareness before bed. A simple reminder. May I meet the morning with ease. Not as a goal, but as an invitation. This primes the subconscious. It prepares the nervous system. It sets a tone. Another way is to let the body lead. When the alarm sounds, pause. Don't rush. Don't think. Feel the breath, the warmth, the stillness. Then move slowly. Let waking be a gentle unfolding instead of a forced transition. This changes everything. It tells the body it's safe. It tells the mind it's supported, and safety is what dissolves resistance. Breath becomes a key part of this practice. The first few breaths upon waking shape the rhythm of the next hour. Short, panicked breaths activate the stress response. Slow, conscious breaths activate presence. By anchoring in breath, the body begins to wake naturally, even when the mind is still catching up. Buddhism doesn't demand that we love every moment. It teaches us to meet each moment without clinging or aversion. To neither push away nor grasp, just to meet. When waking is met with that attitude, even discomfort becomes workable. Even tiredness becomes part of the practice. There is no need to pretend it's pleasant. There is only the opportunity to not make it worse by fighting it. This mindset also prevents the emotional layering that often follows resistance. When we judge our own reluctance to rise, we create a second layer of struggle. Why am I like this? I'm so lazy. I'll never be disciplined. These thoughts don't help. They harden the identity of resistance, but with compassion, the same moment becomes different. I feel heavy this morning. That's okay. I'll rise slowly. That shift is everything. The practice also involves intention, not in the form of rigid scheduling, but in the form of heartfelt direction. Why do you want to rise? What are you rising into? Not tasks, not pressure, but meaning, purpose, connection. When waking is connected to intention, resistance loses strength. The mind remembers that rising isn't punishment, it's a return to engagement. It helps to create a rhythm that supports this. Not by copying someone else's morning routine, but by crafting one that feels aligned, one that invites you into the day instead of pushing you into it. Even something small, lighting a candle, stretching, washing the face slowly, can become a ritual that makes waking a sacred act instead of a chore. This attitude toward waking changes the entire emotional baseline of the day. Instead of starting from resistance, you begin from willingness. That doesn't mean every moment is joyful. It means the mind isn't adding unnecessary weight to what's already happening. And when the mind stops adding, the body begins to cooperate more freely. Over time, waking becomes something else entirely, not something to dread, but something to observe, a transition to witness, a practice to meet. And even on the hard days, when the body aches or the mind is clouded, you no longer add a fight on top of the fatigue. You simply rise, gently, with care, with breath. The relationship with the alarm clock is just one example of the deeper relationship we hold with change. Because waking is change, it's movement, it's uncertainty, and how we meet it reflects how we meet everything else. If we meet it with fear, the day becomes filled with tension. If we meet it with openness, the day becomes workable. This is what it means to wake without struggle, not to feel perfect, not to be in control, but to meet the beginning of the day as it is, without turning it into something else, with breath, with presence, with acceptance. So tonight, before sleep, whisper to yourself, not as command, but as kindness, "May I wake gently." And when the morning comes and the alarm sounds, pause, listen, breathe. Rise not with pressure, but with awareness. Let the resistance dissolve not by force, but by presence. And as your feet touch the ground, let that be the first step of the practice, not toward productivity, but toward peace, toward living each moment without the added burden of resistance, toward beginning again, not with a fight, but with a willingness to begin. If you've made it this far, then something in you has already begun to shift. Maybe it's the way you now feel your breath before you open your eyes. Maybe it's the way you pause before reaching for your thoughts. Or maybe it's simply that you no longer wake up feeling like the day owns you. Because now you understand. Clarity isn't something you wait for. It's something you train. Gently, patiently, night after night, breath after breath. We've walked through the quiet power of subconscious rituals, the karmic seeds planted in sleep, the softness of pre-dawn compassion, and the freedom of letting go of time. We've learned that identity can be set down, that dreams are mirrors, that mornings are not extensions of chaos, but opportunities for rebirth. We've listened for the voice before thought. We've unlearned the idea that waking must be a struggle, and what remains after all of it is space, inner space, the kind that lets you choose presence before pressure, stillness before noise, awareness before reaction. That's the invitation this entire journey has been whispering to you. Every single morning is a chance to wake up, not just from sleep, but from unconscious living, to start fresh, to meet the day as if nothing from yesterday owns you, because nothing does. The mind is lighter now, and the morning is yours. If this resonated, if even one moment helped you feel clearer, calmer, or more connected, drop a comment below and let me know what shifted for you. What practice will you carry into your morning? What clarity surprised you? And if you want more teachings like this, gentle but deep, practical but timeless, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so we can keep growing together. There's more ahead. But for now, rest well, breathe slow, and tomorrow, wake in peace. See you in the next one.